for we left. What is the relevance of that? Sir Axel asked, confusion writ large on his face. My point, Davos said, fighting to remain calm. I was made to be a sailor, not a debater in the halls of kings. Is that we did not burn anyone to gain the Lord favor and assistance on the black water. We made sacrifice before we set sail. Is this, smuggler, telling us we should observe religious practices at sea? Sir Axel mocked. My lady, Davos implored, directing all his attention at the king and the Red Woman. Your religion tells us that the Lord protects us, brings the dawn and chases the dark and cold away. He is a benevolent God who helps man, he merely asks that we believe in him. Davos took a measured breath. The idea of burning people is religious dogma, rather than fact. He paused. You asked me for my faith on the black water. You said if I wanted a favor from the Lord I had to believe. For a moment, God's help me, I did, and that belief was rewarded. As was your faith, my lady, when you stood at the prow of my ship and asked the Lord's protection. No one had to be sacrificed. You just believed and were rewarded. Davos looked solely at Melisandre. I saw you bring a boy back from the grave. You breathed life into his broken body. You did not sacrifice anyone for that. You just asked the Lord. He took another breath. Surely if any sacrifice is required from your Lord, it's self-sacrifice. To kill others is easy, to imperil yourself is hard. What better testament of your faith can there be? You were willing to burn for your belief, and, for that, the Lord granted you power. Great power that has helped us before and since. The smuggler looked at the king. Do not kill the boy, your grace. No God would ask that we kill a child for his favor. At least not one you'd want to worship. You're a good man. Davos wanted to say to the king. Act like it. Stannis Baratheon stared at him unblinking. He opened his mouth to speak, but another voice interrupted him. He is right, my king. Everyone in the room looked in shock at Melisandre. The Red Woman did not interrupt her gaze into the flames as they danced before her. The Lord of Light granted me power on the black water. Melisandre said, her voice clear as a bell. He clearly favors our undertaking. We should not jeopardize that favor by taking uncertain actions. Uncertain? Slyss asked incredulously. My lady, do you mean to say you may have been wrong? She said this last as little more than a whisper, as if by saying such things out loud she might be struck down. I don't know. Melisandre replied simply. She turned to address the king. I followed the teachings of the Red Temple of Volantis. But none of my mentors and teachers could have done what I did on the black water. She smiled. All I know is that men are flawed, their understanding of a god is incomplete. Small comfort to those she has burned. Until the Lord sees fit to show me the truth of this matter in the flames. She continued. We should do nothing. The king nodded simply. Then we will find a different path to victory. He looked around the room. The boy lives. Sir Davos, Sir Axel, sit down. We have a lot to discuss. As he slipped into his seat, Davos breathed out a sigh of relief. He had won this round. Chapter 33, Margaery 6. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The candle slowly burnt down, the fire from the hearth guttered and died, the sputtering embers being insufficient to hold back the cold night chill that blew through the room's large window. Margaery hardly noticed. So taken with her own thoughts was she that the diminishing light and creeping cold was as nothing to her. It feels nothing like the cold I feel inside. She sat, shrouded in a shawl on the window ledge overlooking the Trident. Inside the castle this was, by far, her favorite place. It allowed her an unobstructed view of the Tumblestone as well as sight of all the area southwest of the castle, including the river road. How many nights have I sat here thinking of Robb? Wondering where he was, what he was doing, whether he was safe. She stifled a sob. Whether he was thinking of me. She wiped her eyes of the tears that had started. Gods, I feel like such a fool. Margaery glanced at the door to her chambers. They all know now, she supposed. Part of her was angry that she gave the vile rumors that pervaded the castle any credence at all. Having heard the rumors, she had dispatched her handmaidens to find out more. She had had Saya flirt with one of the scouts and find out all she could. To her dismay, Margaery had been unable to find holes in the telling of her husband's activities. All stories agreed that the king had been injured and tended to by Jane Westerling. Granted, several of the tales were embellished, but the basic face remained. She had been seen entering and leaving the king's chambers at the crag at all hours of the night. "Please," Margaery said, looking into the night. "Gods be good, let Robb have been true." On the outside, the issue of Robb's inconstancy presented very little problem. Lords were unfaithful to their ladies all the time. The numbers of bastards in the realm was prolific. King Robert alone had a legion of children that were not the product of a union with his queen. On the inside? Well, on the inside it was quite different. In the long hours, Margaery had realized that she had come to love her husband. True, she had been sent north to win Robb's affection, but she had never expected to fall in love as well. No, it had surprised her, and of course love had made her vulnerable to pain. The fact that she had been so foolish angered and scared her in equal measure. That Begin said, part of her refused to believe it. She had after all initially dismissed the rumors. Robb seemed like an honest man, honorable and true. Seemed. Eddard Stark was known as an honorable man, yet he was untrue to his wife. To his beloved Catelyn. This was the thought ever present in her mind. No matter what she did, she could not shake it. Maybe he had taken advantage of being away from her. Maybe Jane Westerling wasn't even the first. Mayhap he hadn't even been a virgin on their wedding night. And so it went, around and round like a monster feeding on itself. It was also the fact that, if the rumors were true, Margaery's own abilities were suspect. She had been taught from a young age to read people, to understand them. Until recently she would have wagered all she had on the fact that Robb loved her, that he did not have it within him to be unfaithful. If he had, then her own abilities were suspect. Her confidence in herself was rocked. That was perhaps the worst pain. It can't be true. If nothing else, Garland has been with Robb this entire time. Margaery knew her brother would be able to settle this. The likelihood of Robb betraying his wife when her brother was acting as his bodyguard was laughable. But there are ways round even that. Enough. I will know the truth tomorrow. The next morning came too soon, and yet not soon enough for the suffering queen. As her handmaidens knocked and entered to prepare their mistress for the day ahead, they were disconcerted to find Margaery wide awake and staring at the chamber ceiling. The queen barely registered their presence as the girls busied themselves around her. They might as well not have existed for all the attention she gave them. Finally Myra could delay no longer. "Your Grace, forgive me." The girl was sympathetic but firm. "We've had word that the king will be here very soon. You must be ready for his arrival." "Must I? Who cares if I stay in my bed? I could just blame it on my condition." Margaery looked at her principal handmaiden. The girl had a stubborn look on her face. After a silent struggle between them, Myra broke the silence. "It is your duty, Your Grace," Myra stated resolutely, her mouth setting. "It would be unthinkable for you not to be in the courtyard to receive the king. Curse the Northerners and their notions of duty. Where was Robb's sense of duty when he slept with another woman?" The queen nodded slowly and rose from her bed. She walked into the center of the room and stood there in her simple shift. After a moment she spoke at her servants. "Well?" As one, Margaery's handmaidens gathered around her. Within moments they had removed her shift and got her into a bath. The queen did not say a word as they bathed her, soaping her skin, brushing under her fingernails, pouring scented water through her hair. Before she knew it, her servants had finished their ministrations and she was out of the water and being dried off in the middle of the room, before the roaring hearth that warmed her skin. She felt none of the usual pleasure she received from such attention. Slowly and with their usual efficiency her handmaidens readied her for the day ahead. Myra had prepared her silver-green dress that hung off her shoulders. Its intricate pattern seamlessly incorporating aspects of the North and the South. Margaery regarded herself in the full-length mirror in front of her. "It isn't supposed to be like this. I've longed for Robb and I to be together again. But now it's sullied by the rumors that are making their way round the castle like the bloody flux." Saya finished with her hair, having gathered the long braids and setting them high up in a southern style, holding them in place with ornate silver pins shaped like fish, a nod to the Riverlanders. As they finished, the handmaidens stepped back respectfully so that she could scrutinize their work. Margaery had to admit she looked stunning. Her dress hugged her figure in a flattering way, her hair and skin shone. She looked every inch the queen she had always wanted to be. "Thank you, ladies. Leave me." Her handmaidens curtsied and quickly made their way from the room. Margaery saw some of them exchange glum, unhappy looks that were nothing but a pale reflection of her own feelings. "Your Grace." She turned to see Myra standing at the chamber door looking apologetic. "Yes, Myra, what is it?" The girl who meant so much to Margaery curtsied low. "Beg pardon, Your Grace, but I wanted to tell you that." "What now?" "Go on, Myra," she urged with reluctance coiling in her gut. "Please let there be no more bad news." Myra straightened to attention. She looked at the Queen. "I just wanted to say, Your Grace, that I, for one, refuse to believe the rumors coming out of the Westerlands." "Oh," Margaery said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her handmaiden straightened. "I had the honor of attending you at your wedding. I saw, firsthand, how the king looks at you. How you are together. Anyone with eyes can see how much he loves you." A defiant expression gripped Myra's face as she took a deep breath. "I refuse to believe that the king would ever be unfaithful to you. Oh Myra, loyal girl that you are. You have no idea how much I want to believe that." "That doesn't appear to be the story coming out of the West, Myra." "It's lies, Your Grace," Myra said, stubbornly shaking her head. "King Robb is a Stark of Winterfell, the son of Lord Eddard. He wouldn't betray you." The girl's eyes widened. "He couldn't. It's not in his nature." "Poor girl, you've read too many fairy tales. It's in everyone's nature." Margaery thought darkly. She willed away the black mood that threatened to engulf her. "Thank you, Myra," she said sincerely. "You are a good and loyal friend." The girl nodded uncertainly and took her leave. Margaery knew many of the Northmen felt the same as Myra. Lady Catelyn had tried to see her numerous times, but Margaery had refused to grant her an audience. She was not ready for a conversation with Robb's mother. "Now, it appears I'm out of time." She stood by the window watching the west. Suddenly horns rent the morning air. She discerned movement at the tree line some leagues away, only visible to her because of the height of Margaery's chamber. Without warning, a screen of scouts emerged from the trees, spreading out and making for Riverrun. In the distance Margaery could make out a column of troops winding their way down the river road. At their head, surrounded by his honor guard, was the king. Robb sat astride a white charger as he rode confidently toward the castle. Even if she hadn't recognized her husband nor the horse that her family had gifted to him on their wedding day, she saw a grey figure, resembling a hound but much too big to be one, alongside the horse, keeping pace with ease. Grey Wind, as always, was accompanying his master. Without warning, Robb turned in his saddle and shouted something over his shoulder. He spurned on his mount and the animal broke into a gallop. With a holler of triumph, Robb's honor guard followed, breaking away from the main column and making for Riverrun at speed. As the small group neared, Margaery could start to make out her husband's face. Her heart flipped as the king rode hard for Riverrun. "My love." Margaery put her hand on the side of the wall beside the window to steady herself. An involuntary sob uttered forth from within her. She realized she had spent the last 2 days being so angry with her husband that she had forgotten how good it was to see him alive and well, that the fears for his safety that had gnawed at her constantly for months were unfounded. "Robb, my sweet, sweet Robb." Margaery turned quickly and walked from the room. "It's time to put this issue to rest." She entered into the courtyard at Riverrun just as the first of the honor guard arrived through the gates. She sidled up and, unobtrusively as she could, took her place at the center of the waiting dignitaries. She saw Catelyn Tully give her an entreating look, but she refused to meet the other woman's eye. "Not now, mother. Later. God's willing, perhaps not even then." The small folk of Riverrun had gathered to cheer their king. While some shot her knowing looks, others looked upset, clearly feeling for their queen. "At least I know that my efforts to win support among the people has met with some success." More riders came through the high archway that marked Riverrun's entrance. The small folk and nobles of Riverrun cheered as their king entered the courtyard. Robb wore no helm and he smiled broadly as the denizens of his uncle's castle cheered. He urged his horse towards a group of them waving left and right. He looked down, his eyes sought hers. Margaery stared up at her husband's deep blue eyes, but she refused to match the smile he gave her. Robb's grin faltered slightly. He looked back up. He waved at the people one more time and then kicked his legs out of his horse stirrups and deftly landed on the ground in front of her. He handed the reins of his horse to a waiting squire. "My queen," he said brightly. Margaery had no choice. "My king," she said, curtsying before him. "Welcome back to Riverrun." Protocol dictated that he took her hand, either kissing it or perhaps her cheek. The king did neither. He reached under her arms and lifted her from her feet. Twirling her around, he set her down and sought her lips with his own. The crowd went mad. The cheering and hollering went up considerably, the sound deafening in the enclosed space of the courtyard. Margaery gave herself to the moment and returned the embrace. Robb hungrily kissed her, and for a brief moment the turmoil of the last few days faded away. But, too soon, the king withdrew. He was smiling at her broadly. This time the queen returned it, though it lacked a lot of the usual warmth she would offer him. The king quickly moved to one side to hug his mother, who whispered something in his ear as they parted. A look of concern crossed the king's features, but this was quickly replaced by one of sympathy as he came face to face with Edmure Tully. The two men clasped arms and embraced as warriors. Looking uncertain, Robb returned to her. He placed one arm behind her back and drew her to him. He angled them both round so they faced the people. Seeing their king and queen together once more, the crowd's cheers increased once again in volume. Margaery could feel the king looking at her from the side, sensed his eyes on her. "He knows something's wrong. Perhaps he knows that I know." The queen turned her face to offer her husband a wide smile as she waved to the people. With a troubled face, Robb did likewise, though with less enthusiasm. After a few moments the royal couple turned and walked back through the main doors to Riverrun's interior. They walked hand in hand for a few moments through the hallway. Finally, the king pulled her round and took both her hands in his. "By the gods, it is good to see you again," he breathed, leaning in to kiss her. Margaery avoided the touch of his lips. "I am pleased to see you safe, your grace." "Pleased?" Robb looked a bit indignant. "I would hope for." Margaery looked over his shoulder, past the king. Through the doorway members of the king's honor guard were starting to troop through the wide open door. The men, and one woman, were swapping jests and laughing. After a quick search of their faces she looked at the king. "Where is my brother?" Robb smiled. "He's safe, my love. Safe and sound. I've sent him to Harrenhal to order the Northmen to prepare to leave." "Leave? Where are they going?" Margaery demanded, her harsh tone reflecting her frustration at Garland's absence. Robb looked taken aback by her vehemence. "I need my northern forces to help me rid our home of the Ironborn. I need the northern garrison at Harrenhal. I'll shortly be giving instruction to Uncle Brynden that he is to lead a force of Riverlanders and to take over Lord Forrester's duties there." "Why did you send Garland to deliver the orders?" Margaery asked, trying to soften her tone and hide her suspicion. Robb frowned. "He volunteered to relay the message. He said he always wanted to see the castle and thought this lull in the fighting presented the right opportunity to do so." Her husband looked apologetically at her. "I'm sorry, my love, I should have thought you'd want to see him, but I owe him my life several times over. When he asked I could not refuse him." "They've quarreled," Margaery thought. "He objected to the way you've treated your marriage vows and you've sent him south on an errand." "He has been of use to you then?" Margaery asked, politely. Robb's eyes lit up. "Oh, absolutely. He and his men are fantastic fighters. They've cut through the Lannister lines like you wouldn't believe. Then there's Lord Tully. The man's a marvel at warfare. I must write to your father and compliment him on the quality of his men." He chuckled quietly. "Between you and me, I'm tempted to sit the war out and let the Blackfish and Lord Tully deal with the enemy themselves. He's babbling, trying to distract me from things. He knows something's wrong but he's not sure what that is. But, I have brought someone else with me." Robb looked at the entranceway. "Sir Loras." At the sound of his name an armored knight turned to face them. Margaery instantly identified her brother. Indeed, she was surprised she's missed him. I was so preoccupied looking for Garland I overlooked Laura's standing across the hall. Laura's. Margaery let go of Rob's hands and walked quickly to her brother. Her sibling offered her a wan smile and then embraced her lightly. He stepped back. My queen. Laura's smiled, bowing slightly. She hit his arm, returning his smile. Don't mock me, brother. Come, hug me again. After they'd finished, Laura's glanced at Rob, his expression soured and he excused himself, saying he needed to get out of his armor. Margaery looked wistfully after him as he walked away from her. She felt a presence behind her and knew that her husband was there. You appointed him to your honor guard, she stated. That, at least, should please him. Laura's has known little joy since Renly died. The king gave her an uncomfortable smile. I offered to my love. Twice. But on both occasions he declined. He said he would not serve as a glorified bodyguard like Garland but wanted to command in the field. Command? Laura's. Margaery was surprised. I am at a loss as well, my queen. Rob said, running a gloved hand through his hair. When Lord Randall found us in the Westerlands, I offered him a chance to join us, but he refused. He asked instead to attack the keep belonging to Gregor Clegane. The king smiled. I'll say this for him though, he accomplished the task in an astonishingly short space of time. Used grappling hooks and went right over the walls. Captured the castle in less than a day. And, later, he was the first over the defenses when your father's men took Lannisport. Rob looked over at the withdrawing figure who by now had summoned a squire to assist with shedding his armor. I mean to offer him land of his own when this war is done. If he's so useful, why did you bring him with you into the east? Margaery could not keep the bite from her words. Rob frowned at her. It was Lord Randall's idea. I hope you don't think me rude, my love, but something troubles your brother. He is prone to fits of anger. He's caused no end of complaints with my other bannermen. Lord Tarly knows I mean to head north and suggested I take Sir Loras with me, said that a dose of the cold northern climate might cool his temper. More like Lord Randall doesn't want Loras in the vicinity when he takes Casterly Rock. He wants the honor to be all his own. So you have spent little time with him? Margaery asked, the puzzle presented by her brother offering her a distraction from her own woes. I've tried, my love. Rob said sadly. But your brother talks to no one, not even Garland. Must be to do with Renly. Poor Loras. Still, why would Loras be upset with Rob? Unless. Rob looked at her adoringly. But I'm forgetting myself. Are you well, my love? Before she could protest, he reached out and lightly placed his hands on her stomach. She could see his earnestness and felt herself melting. I'm quite healthy, thank you. Especially for a woman who everyone believes has an unfaithful husband. The king smiled widely. He offered his arm, which she had no choice but to accept. Together the king and queen began to walk towards the far wall that would take them away from the courtyard and the milling crowds. The queen knew she had to keep up appearances. She linked her arm around her husband's. How was the campaign? She asked, attempting to make small talk. Just as I was taught in Highgarden. Almost a complete success. Rob replied, nodding and smiling to a group of nobles occupying one corner of the room. With the exception of Casterly Rock, the Westerlands are ours. Will Casterly Rock fall? Margaery asked, curious. Lord Randall believes it will. Rob replied seriously. Devan Lannister is holed up in the fortress with a sizable force, but they are besieged on water as well as land. They have no chance to resupply themselves. We can afford to wait them out. You must be pleased. Rob eyed her, puzzled. Well, I think we should all be pleased. The Westerlands and the Riverlands are secure. He took on a solemn expression. If we can just liberate the north, he left the next bit unsaid. Margaery saw more people entering the hall. She suddenly spied a pair of men with seashell sigils adorning their armor talking to a group of soldiers belonging to House Umber. Her chest tightened. I see we have new friends among us. Oh, of course. Rob turned to survey the group. That's Reynold and Rolam Westerling. They, and their family, have sworn fealty to us. Margaery was about to respond to this, but Rob gave her no time. He suddenly turned and motioned to someone behind her. In fact, My queen, I would like to introduce you to someone. Rob was smiling like the midday sun. Queen Margaery, may I introduce you to Jane Westerling? You dare dishonor me. You dare to bring her before me. They stood in their chambers, facing each other across a small round table that, just a few short months ago they had shared as they broke their fast the morning after their wedding. Margaery stood on one side of the table opposite her husband, her arms crossed as she glared in anger. Rob, for his part, looked perplexed beyond reason. It had taken all his strength to usher her from the main hall as her temper boiled over and she began to curse at the Westerling girl. How have I dishonored you? Rob asked in confusion. I have brought her to be your handmaiden. You said you'd like a handmaiden from each of the 7 kingdoms, to apprise you of customs and noble houses. I thought Jane could represent the Westerlands. Oh, it's Jane, is it? Margaery's eyes narrowed. That's her name. Rob said, lamely. If you'd prefer I could call her Lady Westerling, but it's her mother who has the title. I don't give a damn what you call your little whore. Rob went white. My what? Did your ears become injured when you fell from your horse? Margaery spat. I said your whore. Margaery. Rob breathed slowly, he was wide-eyed. There is no need to call her that. Her family may have served the Lannisters, but such thoughts are. Gods help me, what a fool. I care not what side they were on. I care that she's sleeping with my husband. The king had gone quite still, eerily so. He looked quizzically at her and then a chuckle broke forth. He's laughing at me. He thinks it all a jest. My love. Rob said, smiling, that's ridiculous. Ridiculous am I? You think betraying me is a jape? The smile died on Rob's lips. He looked at his wife with a dawning realization. By the gods, you're not joking. Do they put special effort into raising simpletons in the north? No, Rob, I am not joking. Her husband looked astounded. His mouth opened and closed. He screwed his eyes shut briefly, then opened them and regarded her. Just what exactly are you accusing me of? I accuse you, husband, of infidelity. Of betraying your wedding vows. Of betraying me when I'm carrying your child. Say it, Rob. Say it's not true. Say I haven't taken a gamble, based my future on a man who can't keep his cock in his breeches. Rob simply stared at her. He didn't seem to know what to say. I. You were seen together, Rob. I've heard stories of her visiting you in the night. The king looked incredulous. Have you been spying on me? He doesn't even have the grace to look ashamed. Truly, men will do anything. If he regrets anything, it's the fact he got caught. What's more, betraying me isn't enough for you. It's bad enough that you did it at all, but now I'm the subject of castle gossip. From the barracks to the kitchens, the small folk know how betrayed their queen is. How stupid she must have been to think that a simple southern girl could tame a wild northern wolf pup. A what? Rob asked, his eyes narrowing. Spare me your pride. A northern. It doesn't matter, it's a metaphor. Margaery slapped her hand on the table. I have had to endure their looks and whisperings as I walk among them, but then you dare, she slapped the table again. You dare to bring the bitch back to Riverrun and have the affront to recommend that I name her as one of my handmaidens. As if she is to be rewarded for riding her king. Payment like a whore. Margaery began to pace at her end of the table. I wouldn't believe it at first. She fumed. I said, no, Rob would never do that to me, never dishonor me so. But then you bring her here. Bring her right before me, embarrass me in front of others. The only one causing embarrassment is you. Rob said angrily, his temper at breaking point. Oh, I'm sorry, was I supposed to curtsy like a good little wife and accept my husband's mistress? That may be how things are down in the north, where you lie in the straw with the dogs, but in the south we're more civilized. Margaery, Rob said, stunned by the insult. He was shaking his head slowly. I would never. You deny it? She demanded. Please, Rob, tell me it's a lie. No, I do not deny it. Rob hollered at her, slamming a fist into his side of the table, splintering the wood with the blow. Margaery stared in shock, her worst nightmares coming true before her eyes. She swallowed tightly, fought back the beginnings of tears. You don't. The king was leaning over the table, there was blood coming from the hand where his blow had struck the solid oak, breaking the skin. He looked up, breathing deeply to quiet himself. I have no need to deny it. Robb said, terribly calm. The king has no need to explain himself to anyone. Not even their wife. Margaery retorted, recrossing her arms. You don't believe a husband owes his wife some explanation when others say he's been untrue. What should I care what others think? Robb shot back, his face red with anger. I don't owe them anything. What about what you owe me? What I think? She said. Tears came then and she could do nothing to stop them, their presence making her still angrier. We took vows, Robb. We swore that we belonged to each other. Emotion wrought on his features, but eventually Robb's face softened, his anger fading. His hand reached towards her. Margaery, I swear, it's not. You swore on our wedding day. Margaery replied, anger and hurt cutting her to ribbons inside. Now we know what vows are truly worth to a Stark. Still, she said acidly, I shouldn't be surprised. The Honorable Lord Eddard Stark romped with a common whore just a few months after marrying your mother. Perhaps I should be grateful that you haven't yet presented me with a bastard to raise. She had gone too far. It was the wrong thing to say. Margaery saw that as soon as she'd said it. She'd insulted her husband's father and brother. The light died on Robb's face. His emotion was washed away in an instant. She saw the man disappear and the warrior, the stone-cold killer, appear before her eyes. Robb stared at her with cold eyes. Eyes that had none of the Tully compassion and warmth but were suddenly grey and unyielding, like the icy north. Before her Robb Stark was gone, replaced by the young wolf. A tingle of fear crept up her spine. She had never seen her husband like this before. My queen. Robb said, devoid of emotion. You are tired. I suggest you rest before my grandfather's funeral. Your attendance would be missed if you absented yourself. The queen nodded, swallowing, suddenly uncertain. She wasn't sure she could face a large gathering of family and nobles. Her anger overrode her caution as she fought to maintain control of the conversation. What if I choose not to attend? Your attendance, the king said hollowly, is your choice, though for someone who cares so much about appearances I would have thought you'd want to be seen. Robb sniffed. Still, I will not make you do anything. He looked at her, nor will I spend my time making you believe anything either. With that he stalked from the room, slamming the door behind him as he departed. I'll run him through. Loras, no. Margaery ran in front of her brother and restrained him. Please no. Loras Tyrell was lost to reason. His beautiful face was dark with anger. I've just stood talking prettily to that bastard while his fucking grandfather's being burnt, and only after I find out he's made a fool of my sister. He's mocked our house and pissed on our honor. It might not be true. Margaery said, fully aware that only the fact she was pregnant had prevented her much stronger brother from easily brushing her aside. Maybe he's not totally lost to reason. Of course it's true. Loras raged. These kings are all the same. Only Renly would have been different. He was often disgusted by Robert's constant whoring. Oh, Renly would have been different all right, he'd just have been having a parade of men coming through his bedchamber rather than girls. We must be cautious. Margaery urged, still keeping her hands on her brother's shoulders. We must do nothing rash. Rash? By the gods, Margaery. The man's betrayed you, less than 3 months after the wedding. Her brother glowered. You're carrying his child. He's betrayed you and the family. I'll make him pay. Not now, brother. She said sharply, looking intently at him. It's important that we remain calm. You're one to talk, her brother retorted angrily. Your little performance earlier is the talk of the castle. Wonderful, as if the gossips didn't have enough to talk about. I was upset. She admitted. But now we have to move forward. I am on my way to the council. She glanced nervously at the door to her chamber. I won't permit you to accompany me if you're going to make a scene. Her brother grit his teeth. Well, I won't allow you to face that ingrate alone. Then you must behave. The queen said pointedly, looking into his eyes to ensure he understood. I need your word, brother. Loras looked at her, finally relenting. Very well, sister. Reluctance came off him in waves as he smiled sarcastically. I'll be good. Margaery nodded. She took her hands off him and quickly smoothed her dress of shimmering green silk. Then come, we should have been downstairs before now. As they walked from the room she heard Loras mutter. Doesn't matter what this council decides. When father hears of what's going on up here, he'll withdraw from the alliance. Don't be too sure. Margaery thought as she and her brother quickly made their way to the main hall. Father wants to be connected to royalty. He might command I remain with the king just to maintain my position. Margaery doubted her father cared overmuch about her happiness. Gods be good, he wanted to marry me to a renowned pillow biter. She considered as they walked through the corridors of Riverrun. No, that's unfair. Renly may have liked men, but he would never have mistreated me. His dalliances would probably have been limited to Loras and thus no threat to me or my position. Robb's unfaithfulness might stir my father's wrath like nothing has before. Mace Tyrell might surprise us all. They entered the main hall and saw that they were late. The council meeting had begun without them. The entire room was a throng of activity. Lords both high and low were around the room. Some had not even changed from the funeral. The smell of the river was on them all. The ceremony to mark the death of Hoster Tully had been as somber an affair as one would have expected. The assembled mourners had gathered on the bank of the Trident to pay their respects. At the appointed time, the former Lord of Riverrun had been placed on a funeral pyre and launched downriver by Robb, Tytos Blackwood, Jon Osbracken, Mark Piper, Jason Mallister, Cale Vance and Lothar Free. As the boat had floated away, slowly gaining speed as the current dragged it into the middle of the river, Edmure Tully had stepped forward with his bow. He had lit an arrow from a torch held by a waiting servant and then fired at the boat. He missed by yards. Twice more Edmure Tully fired at his father's floating pyre that became ever more distant with each passing second. The group was becoming restless as they watched, some of the Riverlanders openly expressing dismay. Margaery knew that, for tradition to be followed, the boat must be set aflame, but there was now real danger that the funeral boat may travel too far out of range for it to ever be hit. The Blackfish looked beyond anger. He itched to take his nephew's place and give his brother the send-off he deserved. Finally he could take it no more and he stepped forward, but was gainstayed by Catelyn Stark, who put her arm out, obstructing her uncle. As the Blackfish looked angrily at her, his niece nodded over her shoulder indicating Edmure. The man had tears streaming down his face, frustration gripping him as he watched his father slipping further away. He hung his head, unable to bear the grief and public shaming. Suddenly he was joined at the riverbank. Roslyn Free had left her place with Margaery's handmaidens and joined the new Lord of Riverrun. She cupped his head with her hands, lifted his eyes to meet hers. For the briefest of moments the two looked at each other, neither saying a word. Then Roslyn smiled sweetly and kissed Edmure's cheek. The touch galvanized the man. He nodded, turned, lit another arrow, checked the wind direction and then fired in one solid movement. The arrow streaked through the air and impacted the boat dead center. Within moments the small wooden craft was a burning inferno. Roslyn beamed before she started to make her way back to her appointed place with the servants. She was stopped by Edmure, who took her hand and brought it to his lips. He closed his eyes and nodded to her in silent thanks. Margaery had felt tears run freely down her face. This is how love should be. As they made their way back to the castle, she had not been surprised to learn from Myra that rumors abounded that Edmure had proposed marriage to Roslyn that morning. No wonder she felt confident enough to break convention and assist Edmure. It was the kind of support that could only be offered from someone to whom you're intended. There was no sign of Roslyn in the great hall though. A quick glance around the room confirmed that Margaery and Catelyn were the only women present. The assembled commanders of both the Northmen and Riverlands were present. Only the bannermen of the Reach were absent, having been left to garrison the Westerlands and complete the conquest of Casterly Rock. Margaery felt a flash of resentment. Why is it that only the men of the Reach are currently fighting? At a corner of the great table that occupied the middle of the room, Margaery saw that a noble of the Reach was present. Sir Garth Hightower was standing rigidly by one side of the table. Weariness was all over his face, his clothes were dusty and mud splattered from his urgent ride east. Why is he here? Has something happened? Margaery strode through the room, Loras close by her side, to her place at the table. On this occasion a space had been left vacant exactly opposition the king. The table was only again taken up by the large map of the Seven Kingdoms. Margaery made to stand behind Lady Catelyn, who was watching her son intently. Margaery gave her a glance of concern and tried to offer her a smile, but Catelyn merely looked sad. "Your Grace, we cannot deviate from our purpose," Lord Robert Glover was saying. "We have all but conquered the Westerlands. We've secured the Riverlands. Let's drive the Ironborn from the north." The king nodded but did not look up from the map. "Please your grace." Sir Garth Hightower spoke up. "Heed the message from Lord Tyrell. You owe loyal vassals your support." "By the gods, what has happened?" Margaery looked around confused, but no one seemed inclined to assist her. The Blackfish leaned over from his station at Catelyn's side and spoke to her. "The Greyjoy fleet has attacked the Reach." Margaery felt a shard of icy fear grip her. "We should drown the Iron Islands in blood for this." Loras snarled. "Easy lad," the Blackfish said grimly. "You won't get anywhere unless you control your temper." Loras glared at the older man but did not reply. "Is my father able to deal with the threat?" Margaery asked. "Uncertain, my queen." The Blackfish replied with disarming honesty. "Certainly he has the men, but he has gathered his reserves in the east to threaten Storm's End." "Storm's End?" Margaery gasped. "By the gods, he wants to make up for his failure to beat Stannis almost 20 years ago. He feels left out of the glory by not being involved in the fighting. He wants glory for himself. Stupid, stupid man." "Indeed." Blackfish responded, tutting. "Beg pardon, my queen, but your father had left his flank open." The Greyjoy fleet sailed right past Lord Redwyne at Casterly Rock and headed south. The Shield Islands are under attack as we speak. The Redwyne fleet should have been at home, protecting the Reach, not on some venture to further Robb Stark's glory. Loras fumed. The Blackfish regarded him stiffly. "That's King Robb to you, boy. Best remember it. A man who would betray my sis." Margaery silenced him by stepping on his foot. She gave him a furious look, silencing his protest. She turned to Brynden Tully. "Please forgive my brother, sir. He's just overwrought at our home being attacked." "Not necessary, your grace." The Blackfish replied, eyeing Loras curiously. He gave the queen a wry smile. "Having your home invaded makes you in good company as far as this gathering's concerned." "True enough." Margaery shot Loras a warning look before returned to the table. "I understand your concerns, sir," Robb was saying. "Is Lord Tyrell able to fend them off?" "Lord Mace Tyrell has charged his son with the defense of the Reach's coast, your grace. He's also asked that additional force be recalled from the Westerlands to reinforce his efforts." "Does this request come from Lord Willers?" Robb inquired. Sir Garth looked anxious. "No, your grace. Lord Willers wrote to both his father and Lord Tarly saying that he had already reinforced our coastal defences and believes he has enough troops to defend the Reach for the time being. He encouraged Lord Randall to finish the siege of the Rock and then attack the Iron Islands." "Gods bless Willers." The king nodded. "Nevertheless, the attacks on an ally is an attack on us." He pointed at the map, moving troop markers as he spoke. "Please return to Casterly Rock with the following orders. I want all the men that can be spared from the siege to head south to defend the Reach from the Greyjoys. By now Lord Randall will have had the fortress well besieged and won't need all his troops while he's starving them out." His eyes drifted to the sea. "I also want Lord Redwyne to divide his fleet and send half of them down the coast. I want the Reavers cut off from the Iron Islands. Cut the bastards off from their home and destroy them." Sir Garth looked at the map. "As you say, your grace." "Thank you." Robert Glover had opened his mouth to say something, but a raised hand from the king silenced him. "This does not detract from my original purpose, my lord. I mean to head north as soon as possible." "But your grace, you said you intended to utilize the Redwyne fleet to get round Moat Cailin." "We'll find another way," Robb said, offering a confident nod to the Northmen. "He fears they will be too late." Catelyn murmured. Margaery looked at the woman. "Too late for what, my lady?" Catelyn sighed. Lord Bolton has written to us saying that Deepwood Motte has been attacked by the Ironborn. They've taken Torrens Square already. Gods, the Greyjoy fleet is attacking us all over the map. House Mallister can serve you in this regard, your grace. Lord Jason Mallister spoke up from behind Edmure Tully. Robb looked past his uncle to the speaker, Lord Jason. At a nod from his liege lord, Lord Mallister stepped to the table. We've been mustering ships ever since we heard that the Ironborn have attacked the north. My house has been fighting the Greyjoys for generations. We know how to beat them. We can sail your army round the coast and assist Lord Bolton's son in attacking Moat Cailin from behind. Do that, my lord, and you'll have my gratitude. A number of the assembled Northmen voiced their appreciation. For his part, Lord Mallister merely nodded. Your grace. A voice spoke up. We would play our part as well. Margaery was astounded by Lothar Frey's temerity. First they flee the battlefield because Robb insulted them by marrying me, and now they want to be seen to get involved. Though, she thought darkly, Walder Frey got a marriage to Edmure Tully who looks to adore her, while I got Robb Stark who betrayed me within 4 months of marriage. I suppose the Freys are laughing at the whims of fate. Surely, with Sir Rymon's forces in the west, it could be argued that your house is playing its part. Maester Lewin pointed out from the king's side. More like they couldn't prize the greedy cowards away from the gold mines near Ashmark. The lame man nodded. My thanks, your grace. But my father would have us do more. With the marriage of Roslyn to Lord Edmure to take place so soon. Has a date been set so soon, sir? Catelyn Stark objected. Is that not indecent? We have only just said goodbye to my father. Sir Lothar took the rebuke in stride. Of course, my lady, we all grieve for your father, but this is war. We would add our armies to the northern host as it fights against the Ironborn. What exactly do you propose? Robb asked curiously. It seems to me that since your army must march right by the twins on your way home, your grace. Lothar Frey pointed out. Why not have Lord Edmure accompany you? We could have a short ceremony to marry the happy couple. At this the Frey smiled at Edmure. And then we would all march north together. Is the wedding a condition of your support? The Blackfish demanded angrily. Not at all, Sir Brynden. Sir Lothar soothed. Only my lord father cannot travel, and it would warm his heart to see Roslyn wed in person. He looked at Robb. A warmth that would be magnified 1,000-fold if the king was in attendance to honor the union. Robb looked questioningly at his uncle. Edmure Tully shuffled awkwardly. We had considered marrying at the twins. He glanced at Catelyn. But after the war. Why wait? Lothar enthused. We're heading north in any regard. A moment of silence passed over the room. Finally Edmure nodded at Robb. The king turned to the group. Very well, Lothar, we will do as you suggest. He looked at the map. This means a change in orders. Lord Blackwood. You will take Sir Brynden's command at Harrenhal, just until the wedding has been completed. He pointed to a marker that was placed next to Riverrun. March at first light, relieve Lord Forrester and send him and Sir Garland north to me. They will meet us at the twins. Lord Blackwood nodded in compliance. Very well. Robb stated. If there is nothing else. The question hung in the air for a few moments. No one spoke. Good, said Robb. He looked stonily across the table at Margaery. We're going home. Notes. I will say this once, have faith. Chapter 34, Cersei v. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. This is madness. Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock and Hand of the King, looked down the length of the council table and regarded his youngest son stiffly. Your advice was not solicited. It bloody well should have been. The imp retorted, leaning forward in his chair. This is madness worthy of anything Aerys Targaryen conceived of. Watch yourself, Tyrion. Tywin's voice was calm, but his eyes flickered dangerously. Cersei smiled to herself. Tyrion never learns. He thinks the best way to attack a problem is head-on. Her brother looked exasperated. He took a deep breath. You can't mean to do this, father, it is folly of the highest order. Lord Tywin settled into the high-backed chair reserved for the hand. It's done, Tyrion, the invitation has been sent. Tyrion turned his head and glanced at Pycelle. The Grand Maester shifted in his council seat and became suddenly focused with the multiple scrolls he had in front of him. Seeing he'd get no help there, her brother twisted to look at Varys, who was sat calmly, arms folded into his elaborately embroidered robes, in his place. The eunuch smiled obsequiously. "It's the best way, my lord. I beg you to believe me." The Master of Whisperers indicated the head of the table. "The Lord Hand's plan is brilliant." Her brother looked at the eunuch askance. "Brilliantly unhinged, you mean?" Varys lowered his head and receded into his chair as if wounded. "Serves you right, you unctuous toady." She regarded Tyrion. "And serve you right as well, Tyrion, for trusting that simpering woman in the first place. One shouldn't be surprised when the snake rounds on you." Tyrion looked back towards his father. He sat back in his chair. "Perhaps when the war is over I'll head to Lannisport and swim with the mermaids. Or better yet, I'll grow a few inches. 'Tis the season for miracles after all." Kevan Lannister spoke up. "Tyrion, such flippancy is unnecessary." Cersei's brother looked unmoved at the half-hearted rebuke. He continued to stare at his father. "Your attempts at humor are as ill-advised as they are ill-received," Tywin said. "In fact, you'd be better served." The council door chamber opened dramatically and in stepped the king. Joffrey wore his finest red tunic with golden lions sewn in the fabric. Flanked by knights of the Kingsguard, Sir Boros Blount and Meryn Trant, he looked every inch a king. Blount should never have been reinstated. He surrendered Tommen to Bywater without so much as drawing his sword. A sworn knight of the Kingsguard laying up arms to a bunch of gold cloaks. He's an embarrassment. The group stood in respect at the arrival of their sovereign. All except Tyrion, who refused to budge from his chair. The king strode into the room and stood to the side of Tyrion's chair. He barely glanced at his hated uncle before speaking. "Well, grandfather, I'm here. As you asked." "Yes, thank you, your grace, we can see that," Tywin said smoothly. "I thought it wise to notify you of recent events." "How you're losing the war, you mean?" Joffrey snidely commented. Anger crossed his face. "You've lost the Westerlands, grandfather, without even offering a fight." "Your grace," Kevan said, shooting a furtive glance at his older brother. "It was necessary to leave Harrenhal. We had to get south as quickly as possible. We had to ride for the capital to prevent Stannis Baratheon from overwhelming the city." "It was unnecessary," Joffrey snapped. "I had everything in hand here. Stannis was being drawn into the city to destroy him. Tyrion couldn't help himself." "Oh, so we let Stannis in on purpose, did we?" Joffrey glared at him. "Of course, it was all part of the plan. A true king is bold." "Forgive me, your grace." Tyrion smiled. "I mustn't have been aware of this bold plan, fighting on the front as I was, while you here in the Red Keep strategizing like Aegon the Conqueror." Joffrey raised a pointed finger, opened his mouth to speak. Perhaps Lord Varys interceded. "We are unfair to the Lord Hand, your grace. He had no idea of your plans here. All they could see up north was that their king was threatened and moved to defend him. As befits a true servant of the crown." Everyone, to varying degrees, shared a look of scorn at Varys's words. For a moment Joffrey himself looked as if he was going to respond, but then he nodded, seemingly mollified. "In any event," Sir Kevan said, keeping his eyes on Varys. "It is good that we are assembled here, consolidating our forces. We can strike out from a position of strength." "Well then, do so." Joffrey snarled. "While you tarry here we lose more and more." Her son looked at his grandfather. "You may have thought you were doing the right thing, but in the meanwhile you left the Lannister lands completely undefended." The king replied, "All the gold of the Westerlands now belongs to Robb Stark." Cersei couldn't help but agree. "Father's ride south has left us in a perilous state. For the time being," the king's hand stated. Joffrey looked quizzically at him. "Finally!" he exclaimed, a broad smile coming over his golden face. "You mean to march forth and punish the rebels?" "Not immediately, your grace," Lord Tywin said, eyeing his grandson curiously. Joffrey stared at him. "Well, if not now, when?" "He's right to be impatient." Only the crown lands now answer to Joffrey's call. If we can't feed the people or pay the soldiers, we'll be deposed. The consequences of that are too monstrous to contemplate. When we are ready, Cersei's father declared to the king. When we'll be ready, Joffrey replied petulantly. He all but stamped his feet. Internally Cersei cringed. He becomes just like Robert when he doesn't get his own way. While we do nothing, Robb Stark is conquering our kingdom unopposed. It will only be a matter of time before he turns to us. We need not be immediately concerned, Your Grace. Varys spoke up. My little birds tell me that Robb Stark is heading north to the Twins for the marriage of his uncle, Lord Edmure Tully. From there it's likely he'll head north to deal with the Greyjoy armies that have invaded the north. A sly smile began to form on the king's face. He looked at his grandfather. So, you plan to attack the Tullys when Robb Stark's back is turned? Clever. How gratifying to have your support, Your Grace. Tywine said. Here it comes. But her father went on. In order to achieve this aim and have our attack be a success, in order to win this war, we will need more men. More men? Joffrey echoed. Where are we going to get more men from? I hear nothing from Mother and the dwarf but protests that the realm has been bled dry. It has, Kevin Lannister confirmed, nodding. And what untouched forces there are, such as the Dornish, have declared themselves either against us or, at best, neutral. The king looked confused. So where are we going to find more men then? Kevan looked at his brother, who inclined his head slightly in a confirmation of assent. Cersei's uncle looked back at the young king. From across the narrow sea, Your Grace. If anything, the answer to his question only served to make Cersei's son even more puzzled. I can't blame him. I had much the same confusion when they told me earlier, though I hid it much better than Joff. I thought we had the largest sellsword company already with us. Joffrey said. He shot an angry glance at Tyrion. Even those we have will leave us penniless within the month. Well, as a wise man told me recently, a sellsword doesn't give his services away. Cersei's brother smirked. We have to pay them, otherwise we should really call them something else. Stupid little fool. As if now was the time for jests. We're talking about our survival here. Well, that is true, Your Grace. The Golden Company is, by far the largest group of sellswords in Essos. Kevan allowed, swallowing. However, there is another power rising in the east. They may be able to aid us. The king looked exasperated. Who? Tywine Lannister spoke, his voice steady, betraying no emotion. Daenerys Targaryen. Silence descended on the room. Everyone either looked between the king and the hand or found something interesting to look at elsewhere. For a long moment Joffrey merely stared at his grandfather. Cersei found herself thinking how ludicrous it sounded on the face of it. She had needed to be convinced of the wisdom of this action herself. Finally, after a long pause, Joffrey stirred. Daenerys Targaryen. Yes, Your Grace. Daenerys Targaryen. Lord Tywine interlocked his fingers on the table in front of him. Joffrey spread his arms. You told me just last week that she was no threat at all. She isn't. His grandfather replied coolly. She is no threat to us at all. Just our enemies. The king looked at his grandson wild-eyed. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. Kevan Lannister sat forward. Your Grace, it is a good strategy. Daenerys Targaryen has made impressive progress in Essos. She's conquered both Astapor and Yunkai and is making for Meereen. By now she could have taken it. That's potentially 3 rich cities whose wealth she has at her disposal. She has an army of 10,000 unsullied and a great number of sellswords at her command. She would make a powerful ally. We must not forget the dragons, Your Grace. Varys pointed out from his seat. 3 newborn dragons, the first to be seen in the world for generations. If they are newborn, they'll be no threat to anyone. Pycelle grumbled, almost to himself. You should keep quiet, you old fool. I keep meaning to have words with you over the ineffectiveness of the potions you offer those you serve. They grow bigger every day, Grand Maester. Varys responded, smiling lightly. My little birds tell me that they were instrumental in conquering Astapor. Tales of that nature do not concern me. Tywine Lannister declared. Dragons haven't won a battle for centuries. Armies win them all the time, and the Targaryen girl has almost 20,000 well-armed, experienced men at her back. 10,000 trained disciplined warriors. Between that and the Golden Company we'll be able to smash the Riverlanders. They've barely recovered from the last time we struck them. This fact was clearly not lost on Joffrey. The king was smiling broadly, no doubt anticipating a quick victory over the rebels. A thought seemed to strike him. Why would she ally with us? Surely she hates us. Inwardly Cersei sighed. Well, he got there eventually. Tyrion smiled widely. Beloved nephew. You've just proved the saying that truth can often come from the mouths of babes. The king's mouth twisted into a sneer. I'm not a babe, you little monster. His uncle did not back down. Oh, I am a monster, your grace. Be wary that I don't gobble you up as monsters are wont to do with little children. He's become more and more confident of late. Why is that? I'm not a child. Joffrey said hotly, his face reddening with anger. His hands balled into fists. He loomed over his uncle threateningly. Tyrion was unfazed. He looked innocently up at the king. Of course not, your grace. Children have far more endearing qualities. Joffrey raised a hand and made to strike his uncle. Careful. Tyrion said, his eyes glittering. We wouldn't want your hand to slip. If it did, mine might do likewise, and I guarantee my fist will do more damage than yours. He dares. He dares threaten my son right in front of me. Joffrey looked dumbstruck. His face went as white as the snows of the north. Behind him Meryn Trant stalked to the table, his armor making a metallic echo as he strode towards them. No one. He said. No one threatens the king in the presence of the Kingsguard. Tyrion lazily looked away from the knight and looked down the length of the table towards his father. I wasn't threatening the king, sir, I was educating my nephew. Trant went for his sword. Listen, you little. Leave. The command was like a thunderclap. Tywin Lannister hadn't moved a single muscle save those necessary to speak. His order struck Meryn Trant as if it was a body blow. The man was shocked into inaction. He merely stood where he was, looking between the king and the hand. Cersei seethed. Her father was making her son look foolish before his own sworn shield. It's all right, Sir Meryn, she said, trying to salvage the situation. My brother was not threatening the king. It was nothing but a jape. She glared at her brother, a bad one. Apologies, your grace. Tyrion chortled. I make jests without properly thinking them through. Meryn Trant decided to take this as his cue to leave. He bowed awkwardly, though more to Tywin than Joffrey, before retreating to the back of the room. Following the hand's order to the letter, the two knights stepped through the door, obviously intending to wait for the king on the other side. Alone, Tywin directed his attention to Tyrion. Your jokes are not appreciated. I wasn't joking at all. Tyrion replied. Inwardly Cersei seethed. Perhaps they'd like to get their cocks out and measure them on the table. I'm sure Varys could prove to be an objective judge. Joffrey was still standing to the side of the table. His eyes were riveted on his uncle, his mouth twisted into an expression of abject hatred. He couldn't seem to make up his mind of whether he was more angry at his uncle for threatening him to strike him, or his grandfather who had commanded his knights. Luckily for everyone, Kevan Lannister interrupted. The old knight stood and indicated an empty chair next to Cersei. Perhaps your grace would care to sit and we can talk through our strategy. Joffrey's head leaned towards Kevan, but his eyes stayed locked on the imp. Thank you, Sir Kevan, I shall. However, I believe that a king's place is at the head of the table. He stepped up and placed a hand on the back of Tyrion's chair. The king smiled cruelly. I think I will take your seat, uncle. Tyrion rolled his eyes. Nimbly he hopped out of his seat. He took a step back and gave an elaborately servile bow. But of course, your grace. The most powerful man in the room must always sit in the foremost chair, so that everyone may see him and pay him homage. Gleaming in triumph, Joffrey slid into his seat. He was about to reply when Tyrion spun on his heel and headed off in the direction of the empty seat next to his sister. Within moments he'd pulled himself up into the vacant chair and, with an elaborate flourish, he turned to face Tywin, snubbing Joffrey entirely. Inwardly, Cersei raged. She could see Varys, Kevan and even Tywin himself were amused by this bit of theatre. They mocked the king by giving credence to this little monster. After a pause, Tywin broke the silence. "As I was saying, Your Grace. Daenerys Targaryen." Joffrey started as if he'd been reminded of something he'd forgotten. The king looked at his grandfather. "Yes, yes. Daenerys Targaryen." He looked skeptical. "My father destroyed her entire family. Why would she agree to serve us? What's in it for her?" His grandfather's lips twitched in the beginnings of a smile. "She will not serve us." Joffrey's face grew yet more perplexed. "Well then, why bother to mention her at all?" Cersei could see her father's eyes tighten. The gesture was almost imperceptible. Maybe if she had not known him for as long as she had, she might have missed it. As it was, she detected her father's rising anger at her son. Again she intervened. "Let my father explain, my sweet. Don't be so impatient." Her son gave her a pitying look for her trouble before he turned back to Lord Tywin. "Well then, explain. Why would she help us?" Joffrey asked, disbelief on his face. "The bitch would be better off joining with Robb Stark." Tywin Lannister regarded his grandson with something akin to contempt. "Possibly," he allowed. Cersei risked a glance at her father. "That's the first time he's ever admitted that we're losing this war." "Possibly," Joffrey echoed, his face purpling. "Between you and Uncle Jaime, we're being beaten almost everywhere except here." Her son gave her a hateful look. "In fact, between mother and the pair of you, we may as well go and live with the dragon girl in Essos." He gestured around the room before settling his eyes on Tyrion. "There's precious little left here. Let's not forget that mother and the little monster's trick with the wildfire is why the city cannot be defendable." Cersei's eyes flashed with anger. "You can't blame me for this. It was Jaime and father that lost the campaign in the Riverlands. If Tyrion hadn't tried that absurd trick with the wildfire, we'd have been fine. We'd have held until the Golden Company arrived to attack Stannis in the rear. After all, it was I who suggested hiring sellswords in the first place, a fact my beloved brother has failed to mention to father. Even if we could convince this Daenerys woman to leave her little nest in Essos," Joffrey said, crossing his arms. "Why would she join with us?" "Because Tywin relied. We can offer her something that no one else can." "What would that be?" the king asked, his condescension making Cersei wince. The hand of the king looked at his sovereign. "Why," he said, looking disinterested, "we can offer her the Iron Throne itself." Joffrey stared at his grandson in complete amazement. Once again the color left his face as his hands curled into fists. "Do you mean?" the king asked, his tone filled with rage. "To bend the knee? To make her the ruler instead of me? Of course not." Tywin waved a hand dismissively. "Aside from the absurdity of a woman ruling," Cersei gave her father an outraged look, "there is also the issue that you are the king, anointed by the High Septon, under the eyes of the Seven." The Queen Regent looked at her father surprised. "Since when did he become a gods-fearing man?" "More like you don't want to relinquish power for anything." "No, father, I know you too well. You'll burn this kingdom to the ground before you cede control to anyone else." "There is also the fact," Lord Tywin continued, "that one does not give up power. We cannot relinquish our place on top of the mountain. To do so would mean we get pulled off the cliff top and plunged into the abyss." Her father sniffed. "I grant that there is a bad blood between House Lannister and House Targaryen. Well, that's an understatement. But I believe it can be offset by offering the girl what she most desires." Joffrey looked confused again. "If we're not bowing to her, how are we going to offer her that? You say she wants the Iron Throne?" Cersei regarded her son with interest. "It'll be interesting to see how Joff takes this." Her father looked very calm as he beheld his grandson. "The only way to guarantee her assistance is to offer her a marriage pact, a union of the two houses." He scrutinized the king. "More's to the point. A marriage between Daenerys Targaryen and yourself." Silence again pervaded the council chamber. Cersei quickly looked around the men seated at the council table. Uncle Kevan, Varys and Pycelle were looking interested in the king's response to this piece of news. Tyrion had sat back in his chair with an amused expression on his face. Her father looked disinterested in the reaction. Probably because it doesn't matter what Joffrey says, if father has made up his mind then this marriage will happen. Joffrey stood very still for a moment then gathered himself to speak. You want me to share my throne? That would be the way he's put it. Joffrey has never liked to share his possessions. I want you to save your throne. Tywin Lannister replied, his face stern. It is long past time that you did your duty to your family. The family exists to serve the king. Joffrey said hotly. To serve me? Why should I have to marry the Targaryen bitch? The dragons have had their day and now their time is ended. My father saw to that. He's always taken a perverse pride in that. Despite Robert never giving him anything more than token attention, the boy remains devoted to his father. Or rather who he thinks of as his father. Now we need her assistance. Tywin stated firmly. The North will soon be distracted, as will the Riverlands. At the same time the Reach has come under attack from the Ironborn fleet and is asking for their forces to be sent south to assist. Cersei tilted her head to look at her father. This was news to her. There will be chaos everywhere. Tywin continued, ignoring the questioning look of his daughter. Chaos that we must capitalize on. To do that we must have more men. The return of the Targaryens will act as a rallying cry to those too cautious to act. Who's he thinking of? Cersei wondered. In similar circumstance in the past Joffrey could be relied upon to back down, but he had grown in his power and was used to having his word carried out as if it were the words of the gods themselves. He pulled himself up to glare at his grandfather. I will not marry her. He stated, his lips forming a tight line. She can become a vassal to my throne. Give her Dragonstone as her seat. Why would I want that misbegotten rock anyway? Tywin stared unblinking at the king. You will marry her. That is a condition of her return to Westeros. Joffrey wasn't done. I will not. Tywin stood up abruptly. You will. His eyes bore into his grandson's. I will hear no more on this subject. Daenerys Targaryen will sit the Iron Throne again as the consort of King Joffrey. We shall use her armies to destroy the rebels, and the children from your union will rule the Seven Kingdoms. And their last names will be Lannister. Cersei's son stared at her father for a moment. For the longest time neither spoke. Nor did anyone else in the room. It was Varys who broke the tension. Remember your grace, he said slyly, looking at the king. Daenerys Targaryen has 3 dragons. She will need a strong king to help tame them, maybe even ride them with her. Where does he think he is? Some foolish trader offering up donkey rides to gullible children. She was astonished to see that Joffrey was taken with the idea. Her young son's eyes glittered. I would like that. The king said, grinning broadly. I'll bring death and destruction down on my enemies. Her son looked at his grandfather with an odd expression. A chill went down Cersei's spine. Just who, I wonder, does he think are his enemies? Perhaps Lord Varys and the Grand Maester could inform his grace about the 3 dragons. Tywin Lannister said smoothly. He should be fully informed before they arrive. Would you also have them read him a bedtime story? Realizing they were being dismissed, the 2 men stood and ushered Joffrey out. The king allowed himself to be led away, chatting happily about how he'd have his dragon eat Robb Stark and burn Stannis Baratheon. Because of his fixation with the Red God. Joffrey claimed as he stepped from the council chamber. You see. Oh yes, your grace. Varys relied, following the king and bowing. A very poetic idea. The door closed shut behind them. Well, that was a nice piece of theatre, very amusing. Tyrion said, looking sideways at his father, but you're as mad as Joffrey is if you think Daenerys Targaryen to be out knight in shining armor. Girls likely to attack us rather than ally with us. The imp looked quizzical. And who are these others you spoke of? Cersei quenched her anger at her brother's insults and looked to her father for the answer. It was Kevan Lannister who responded. Dorne and the Vale have not declared for either side. Tyrion snorted. Petyr Baelish rules the Vale, he won't declare for us unless it's a sure thing. He opened his arms wide. As for Dorne, the Martells hate us as much as Daenerys Targaryen. We killed Doran Martell's sister, remember? Gregor Clegane was responsible for the death of Elia and her children. Tywine stated. Cersea's brother offered a mocking laugh. You think that they'll believe that the mountain acted of his own volition? Clegane's reputation is well known, Lord Tywine responded. If I offer him up to the girl and the Martells as the perpetrator of those crimes, that should be enough. What of Rhaegar? Tyrion snapped, of the fact you denied him assistance on the Trident. Or that your oldest son drove a sword through the back of the girl's father. Explanations can be found for all those events. Her father said stoically. All that is needed is a reasonable pretext for Daenerys Targaryen to travel home. What makes you think she even wants to? Tyrion asked. Sounds to me like she's carving out her own little kingdom around Slaver's Bay. Why come here at all? Because the girl thinks she deserves it. Their father replied. Her brother Viserys wandered the continent for years trying to gather support for an invasion. He was, obviously, unsuccessful. The beggar king they called him. Kevan said. Tywine shot a glance at his brother. Now, his sister has an army. We can provide safe harbor here. The Crown lands will support her. As will Dorne when they hear that Elia's good sister has returned to take her rightful place. Her brother had no words, he just stared at his father in disbelief. With her additional support we can crush the rebels. Kevan Lannister declared. Tyrion looked shocked. How? Even with your best estimates we can, together, field 50,000 men. The reach equals that alone on its worst day, ignoring the forces of the North and Riverlands. All those forces will be tied up shortly. Tywine declared. They will have more important things to do than fight us while we shore up support. Oh. Tyrion said, tilting his head curiously. And what would those more important things be? You have no need to know. Tywine said resolutely. Just be assured that there is a tool for every task and a task for every tool. Together brother and sister left the council chamber quietly, each thinking over what they had just learned. Father's reluctance to share information is beyond galling. How can we prepare if he doesn't share everything with us? As they neared a split in the corridor, Tyrion spoke. I suppose you're enraged that Joffrey is being married off much as you were. A spark of anger flared in her gut. The audacity to assume to know what I am think. I was Cersei aloud cautiously. But, once I'd gleaned father's intentions I realized that it was wise. His intentions? Tyrion asked. I'd have thought his intentions were quite clear. Really? She let forth a laugh, one full of mirth. If you think that, little brother, your mind is as stunted as your body is short. Oh. Tyrion replied, unfazed by her insult. He stopped walking. Perhaps you'd care to enlighten me. Cersei turned to face him, a wide smile coming forth. She took a moment to enjoy feeling superior to her brother. Well, I feel superior all the time, but here is proof that I'm more intelligent despite his protestations to the contrary. He's all words. And words are wind. Do you really think that father intends for Joffrey to marry that deposed little whore? Tyrion looked cautiously at her. He did say as much. Perhaps you didn't hear him. Oh, he intends to marry Joffrey to her perhaps. Cersei said dismissively. But I doubt they'll have a happy marriage. You think not? Tyrion asked, his face the picture of innocence. Cersei scoffed. No, I think that once we have her men and resources, and the realm acknowledges our alliance, that Daenerys Targaryen will meet with a nasty little accident. She'll fall down the stairs or choke on her favorite pie. Something like that. You're talking of murdering a child? Tyrion said, his face a mask. I said nothing of murder. She said casually. Just an accident. The Red Keep is a perilous place. A fact you should well remember, her brother said stonily. Cersei laughed him off and continued on her way. Just as she was about to go out of his sight, Tyrion fired one last comment at her. Besides, in any event, if the girl accepts, we shall have a new younger queen, even for a little while. I wouldn't wish for that if I were you. You might find yourself being made irrelevant, and irrelevant things have a habit of disappearing. With that, her brother set off in the opposing direction. Cersei stood there for a long moment. The mists of time rolled back in her mind, and she heard an old misshapen woman uttering a prophecy in a darkened space. Queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down, and take all that you hold dear. Circe shivered. The recollection of the prophecy from her childhood cast a dark shroud through her mind. She thought for a moment and then smiled to herself. Come then, Daenerys Targaryen. My father and brother dealt with your mad father. I shall deal with you. Notes. Next stop, the twins. Chapter 35, Margaery 7. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Their arrival at the twins had been a cause for celebration. The household of the twins braved the wind and rain to come out and meet the advancing army. What an awful place! The queen thought as she arrived through the main gates. This castle has none of the charm of Riverrun. Margaery was helped from her carriage by her handmaidens. Gingerly she stepped onto the muddy courtyard, wincing as her feet all but disappeared into the dirt. Your Grace, your dress! Saya exclaimed in dismay. Margaery offered a half-hearted smile. I have others. Lame Lothar limped his way to her, paying no mind to the muddy surface he walked upon. He gave a quick awkward bow. Welcome to the twins, my queen. My father, Lord Walder Free, has asked for you to be presented to him as soon as you arrived. Presented to him? Myra Forrester said, appearing at Margaery's elbow, her long travelling gown trailing being her. This is the queen, sir. The queen. Lord Walder can be presented to her if he so wishes. Lothar Free looked peevishly at the young woman who stood before him. By rights she had no leave to even speak to him, much less reprimand him. Under the northern girl's intense stare the Free gave way. The man bowed again, lower than before. I mean no disrespect, your grace. Only that my father is old and infirm. It would not do to expose him to the elements at his age. He waits just over there. The crippled man pointed to an alcove off to one side of the courtyard. The queen could see an old man sat in a high-backed chair, a small thing from this distance. The chair was surrounded by family members and retainers of House Free. I might as well get this over with. I would rather not expose Lord Walder, Margaery remarked, gathering her skirts to the elements or anything else. Lead on, sir. Lothar gave another low bow and led them across the courtyard. Myra and Saya flanked Margaery as she followed, stepping as cautiously as she could around the piles of dirt and horse dung that littered the yard. The smell was appalling. Unlike Riverrun and Highgarden, it was clear that the Frees gave little attention to keeping their home clean. And we are to have a celebration here. Wonderful. Your Grace. Myra said urgently, keeping her voice low so she could not be overheard. Would it not be better to wait for the king? I would be delighted to. The queen replied, taking a long stride over a particularly large puddle. But seeing as how my husband and I are barely speaking, it would be difficult to coordinate. No, I'll allow Lord Walder to welcome me and then I'll take to my room until the ceremony. Margaery had not wanted to journey to the twins at all. She was several months pregnant and had started being horribly sick in the mornings, vomiting up her evening meal and more besides. She had not relished the idea of the rickety journey by carriage on the uneven roads of the Riverlands. The journey had had no appeal to Margaery at all. Even less when you consider that my husband and I are ignoring each other. The queen considered. No, that's not true. He was paying me his full attention when he commanded me to make this trip. You will attend. Robb had declared firmly in a tone that did not invite disagreement. This is my uncle's wedding you're talking about. My king, Margaery had protested. In case you had forgotten, I am carrying your child. It would not be right for me to make a journey. Nonsense. Robb replied with a wave of his hand. Maester Lewin tells me you're quite well and able to travel. Margaery's eyes narrowed. I'd have a word with Maester Lewin if I thought for a moment I could convince him not to share information about me to my husband. Besides, Robb continued with finality. The twins are not far, you'll be back here in a few days. It's pointless to argue further. As you wish, your grace. Margaery had replied, with as much contempt as she could into that last. Robb has merely glared at her before nodding tightly and walking away. They hadn't been in each other's presence since that moment. They had not spoken at all at Riverrun, and Robb had not visited before they'd left the ancestral home of the Tullys and journeyed north along the King's Road. Now, they were here. In this damp, desolate place. I can see why the river lords look down on these people. They are a dull-looking lot, their castle a reflection of practicality rather than family. It's a business, not a home. Still, I gather the Freys have made a good living down the generations, extorting passage over the Trident to those who need it. Margaery arrived in the small stone alcove and came before Walder Frey. Whatever she had been expecting, she was to be disappointed. The Lord of the Crossing was a bald, wizened thing. Loose skin dangled beneath his receding chin, his eyes were runny and clouded, and his toothless mouth constantly moving. He was propped in his chair, a cushion beneath him and a velvet robe bunched around his narrow frame, protecting him from the cold. The old man did not rise but looked at her curiously behind hooded reptilian eyes. Lord Walder. Margaery didn't need to turn to know that her husband had rode in behind her. In an instant he was off his horse and at her side. He offered his arm to her and, not looking, she slipped her own arm over his. The niceties must be observed. Your Grace. Walder Frey uttered by way of reply, again not rising. You'll forgive if I do not kneel. My legs no longer work as they did. He turned to regard Margaery again. Though what hangs between them still serve well enough, hey. The old man smiled toothlessly, the dry old skin of his face pulled up into a rictus grin. Margaery looked from the lord before her to the young woman to his right. Evidently the latest lady of the twins. She resisted the urge to shudder at the thought of this old lecher abed with such a young girl. Robb merely nodded noncommittally. This is her, is it? Walder Frey asked, looking Margaery over, his eyes lingering overly long on her breasts and legs. This is Queen Margaery. Robb replied through gritted teeth. I can see why His Grace chose you over any of my brood. Lord Walder said, lasciviously looking her over once again. Oh yes, yes, I see it now. You're certainly more attractive than anything my wives have ever produced. I'm sure your daughters do you credit, my lord. Margaery offered. She dared not look at her husband, but she could feel the tension in his arm as he fought to control his temper. I see now why the king felt the need to spit on my family. Walder cackled, looking around at his relatives. Heh, oh yes, can't I just? Robb's fists tightened. There was no dishonor, my lord. I did consider your offer of marriage and would have been honored to marry any of the ladies of your house. However, in this case, my heart directed me on a different course. I fell in love with the Lady Margaery. She felt her chest tighten. It was good to hear him say he loved her. Or at least had once been in love with her. Heh, love, eh? Lord Walder snorted, take it from me, your grace, love doesn't last. I've been married enough times to know. Robb's eyes blazed. You will have to forgive me if I believe different, my lord. Oh, don't get me wrong, my boy. The old man said, leaning back in his chair. This talk of love has its place, makes the wedding night more bearable for the women if nothing else. He looked at the queen's breasts, and I'd wager the king needed no help finding his way to your bed. Oh no, I bet he was right up inside. Why? My lord. Lothar Frey admonished, shock on his face. For a moment the Freys looked in silence at one another. Margaery could feel Robb's simmering anger boiling up. His body was taut, like a coiled spring. Walder Frey noticed the king's ire as well. Excuse an old man his foibles, your grace. He smiled grimly. It's only with age that we can appreciate the beauty of youth. My lord is too kind. Margaery said. Lord Walder brushed this off. Nonsense. My eyes are not so far gone that they can't appreciate a woman. Besides, he offered another wide grin, it's the only thing that gets a rise these days. Robb started forward, Margaery spoke quickly to intercede. He'll kill the old man. It was nice of you to host the wedding here, my lord. She glanced quickly at Robb to make sure he didn't do anything foolish. Her husband's face was murderous. A Frey stepped forward. Margaery vaguely recalled that this one was Edwin Frey, eldest son of Sir Ryman, who was currently camped at Ashmark. He cleared his throat. We have chambers prepared for you and the Queen in the water tower, your grace. The man spoke courteously though somewhat dully. The same for Lord Edmure and Lady Catelyn. Your Lords Bannerman are also welcome to shelter under our roof and to partake in the wedding feast. What of my men? Robb asked sharply, directing the question at Lord Walder. Lothar Frey answered for the old man. My lord grandfather regrets he cannot feed nor house a host as large as the one you have brought your grace. We are hard-pressed to find food for our own levies that we've raised to assist with the liberation of the north. However, we have set up 3 large feast tents on the far bank of the river. If you would direct your forces to cross, they are welcome to set up camp beside our own. I will order the servants to bring out casks of wine and ale so that we may all drink the health of Lord Edmure and Lady Roslyn. A wise choice for Lord Walder to let Lothar speak for him. The man has all the makings of an impressive diplomat. I'm sure my son wishes to thank you on behalf of his men. Lady Caitlin said, arriving next to her son and looking at him pointedly. They have had a very wet, unpleasant journey. Her son nodded. Yes, of course. Thank you, my lord. Excellent. Edwin said. He gestured them into the castle. If you will follow me, we will show you into your rooms and have you settled. The Queen and my mother will go on ahead. Rob said. I need to see my men across the river, my lord. Walder Frey snorted. They shan't get lost. He complained. They've crossed before, haven't they? When you came down from the north. But suit yourself. Lead each man across by the hand if you'd like, it's naught to me. Rob nodded to Margaery and Caitlin. He made to turn towards his horse. He was halted by his mother, who caught his sleeve. My lord. Caitlin spoke clearly. We have travelled many leagues. Some food would be most welcome. Walder Frey twitched slightly before smiling. Food, hey? He winked. What would take my lady fancy? Some bread perhaps. A bite of cheese, mayhap a sausage. Some bread would do, my lord. Rob said. With salt. And some wine to wash it down. Bread and salt. The old man looked shrewdly at the king. Of course, of course. He clapped his hands and a servant approached bearing a tray of bread and cheese. Another servant bore a flagon of wine. Lord Walder took a cup of red for himself and raised it high with a withered hand. My guests, he said. My honored guests. Be welcome beneath my roof, and at my table. They convened a meeting of the War Council some hours later, after the king had supervised the army's crossing of the Trident. Margaery had been reluctant to go, but Myra had been adamant, and the queen had finally given up the struggle and made her way to the twins' great hall, which had been commandeered for the meeting. The usual group were in attendance. As she took her place at Rob's side, she heard a man's voice to her left. Queen Margaery. He said faintly. It is a pleasure to look on you once again, even in such trying times. Far more graceful than Lord Walder. You are kind to say so, Lord Bolton. She replied, nodding to the tall man. The queen observed the room. The air of gloom was almost palpable. Even the great Jon seemed somber and subdued. As she surveyed the grim faces, she said. What has happened? Lord Bolton has brought us further word of Winterfell. Rob answered, his face looking pained. Winterfell is all but gone. Sir Roderick Castle is dead, along with Cleisewin and Leopold Tallheart. Margaery vaguely recalled the name. Sir Roderick was the Castellan of Winterfell, and Sewin and Tallheart were some of the Stark bannermen. There was a pitched battle at Winterfell, my queen. Lord Bolton said. Many good men died there. My bastard, Ramsay, managed to drive the Greyjoys out, but the castle caught fire. It is nothing but a ruin now. The inhabitants? Margaery asked. They have been led back to the dread fort, your grace. Your son has been accused of grievous crimes. Caitlin spoke up, sharing a look with Maester Lewin. Of murder, rape and worse. Roose Bolton looked at her expressionlessly. Yes. He responded simply. His blood is tainted, this cannot be denied. Yet, he is a good fighter. After Sir Roderick and Lord Tallheart fell, it was him that routed the Ironborn and pushed them out of Winterfell. He has sworn not to sheath his sword until the north is rid of the scum of the Iron Islands. He was to march to liberate Torrens Square, but I called him south to attack Moat Cailin. First things first. Rob cut in. Did Ramsay tell you what became of Theon Greyjoy? Lord Bolton drew out a ragged strip of leather from the pouch and offered it to Rob. The king looked at it in shock. Is that skin? From the top of Theon Greyjoy's little finger? Roose Bolton answered. My son is a cruel man, it is true. But what is a piece of skin next to the lives of two princes? The Lord of the Dread Fort regarded Catelyn. Your two sons have not been found and it is suspected that Theon Greyjoy killed them. Robb and Catelyn both shut their eyes. Maester Lewyn looked distraught. He breathed deeply before looking at Lord Bolton. Please, put it away. The king opened his eyes slowly. Flaying Theon will not bring my brothers back. I want his head, not his skin. Theon is Balon Greyjoy's only living son. Roose Bolton pointed out. And now the rightful king of the Iron Islands. He has great value as a hostage. Margaery frowned. Balon Greyjoy is dead. Pardon your grace. Maester Lewyn said apologetically. Lord Mallister has sent word from Seaguard. Balon Greyjoy is indeed dead. He apparently drowned in an accident. The gods do indeed have a sense of humor. You would use the man who killed my sons as a bargaining chip. Catelyn's voice was sharp. Whoever sits the Seastone chair will want Theon dead. Lord Bolton stated. Even as a captive the boy has value. He has a better claim than any of his uncles. I say we hold him and demand concessions from his rivals to the throne as the price for his execution. It sounds wise, if not cold-blooded. Robb thought for a moment and then nodded reluctantly. Very well, my lord. Keep him in the Dread Fort until we've reclaimed the north. Nodding again, he looked sharply at Roose Bolton. Now tell me of your progress in breaking through Moat Cailin. Lord Bolton looked uneasy. More uneasy than he was discussing the flaying of an enemy. I have been unable to force a path through your grace. What is the problem, Bolton? The great Jon snarled. You must outnumber them. Roose did not take his eyes from the king. I blame myself, your grace. I delayed our assault too long. After being given the command by Queen Margaery, I set off with all the northern reserves at Riverrun, stopping only to gather some forces from Lord Forrester's host on the Trident. He paused briefly, measuring his words. I have sent several assaults against the moat. It has been tough going, trekking through the neck among bogs and unstable ground. Locke and Hornwood men have paid a terrible price trying to scale the walls. But the Ironborn are dug in deep. The extra time I took to gather forces has allowed them to set up an impenetrable barrier. Robb grit his teeth. Has Lord Reed not been of assistance? Lord Bolton shook his head. With regret, Lord Reed seems to be working to his own agenda. I've had reports that his Crannogmen are fighting a hit-and-run battle against the Ironborn, but they have not joined any of our assaults. With respect, your grace, perhaps Lord Reed has lost his nerve. The king's eyes hardened. I will not have that said, my lord. My father knew the worth of Howland Reed. Roose Bolton spread his hands. As you say, your grace. Maybe Greywater Watch has a plan. All I can speak to is my own experience. Very well, Robb said grudgingly. What else has been contained in your son's reports of the north? Apart from Winterfell, Torrens Square and Deepwood Motte have fallen. Roose reported quietly. My bannerman Lud Whitehill tried to join with Forrester forces to retake Deepwood, but Lady Eliza refused to add her husband's troops to ours. Robb drove a fist into his own hand. What in seven hells is going on up there? Lord Bolton looked apologetic. I do not know, your grace. I've been stuck here. Well, that ends now. Robb declared, looking at the assembled lords. Mage Mormont and Lord Karstark will travel in search of Greywater Watch. They will take messages to Lord Reed and begin preparations to retake Moat Cailin. He looked at the two warriors. You and your men will leave tonight. The two nodded. After the wedding, Robb continued. My uncle Lord Edmure will return to Riverrun and rule the region. Sir Brynden will take command of the garrison at Harrenhal. The king regarded his two relatives. Your orders are simple. You are merely to hold the Riverlands in case of attack. You are not to cross into the Crownlands or the Vale unless I give the word. What of Lord Tarly? The Blackfish asked. Randil Tarly has more than enough men to finish off the Westerlands. The king replied. Once he taken Casterly Rock, the entire region is ours. Margaery nodded to herself. Knowing Lord Tarly, it won't be long before Casterly Rock has fallen. From there, Robb said, I want the power of the Reach turned onto the Iron Islands. He smiled grimly. The dogs attacked us in the north and the south, trying to take advantage of the chaos of the war. Well, They are about to discover what it's like to lose what they love. And as for us, your grace? Lord Bolton asked. Lord Forrester and Sir Garland will be here shortly. Rob replied. With them will be the northern garrison that had been stationed at Harrenhal. They will march straight to Seaguard. Lord Mallister has already gone ahead to make preparations. We will utilize the boats they have there and ferry our troops to attack the moat from the north while you, Lord Bolton, attack from the south. If we can combine his troops with your sons, then all the better. With pleasure, your grace. Lord Bolton said, bowing. We're done here, Rob commanded. Thank you, my lords. The men filled out. As Margaery started to walk away, Rob called after her and his mother. I would talk to you both before we celebrate Uncle Edmure's wedding. What now? Margaery wasn't sure she could take any more today. Thankfully it was Lady Catelyn who responded, gesturing her sworn shield, Brian of Tarth, to go on without her. She turned back to her son. What is it, Rob? My taking an injury at the crag has forced me to rethink matters. The Queen's head whirled. What could he be talking about? The king looked from the map in front of him. He idly played with a Stark model, running his fingers over the rough wooden carving. I have been forced to face the fact that I could die in battle. Margaery paled. As much as she was angry with Rob, she did not want to consider the possibility he might die. Rob, his mother said, looking scared, please don't. Her son offered a wan smile. I am young, and I am hopeful that I will live a long life. However, a king must have an heir. If I should die in the north, the kingdom must not die with me. I need an heir. Bran and Rickon are missing. We still have no idea where Sansa and Arya are, or even if they are alive. You have an heir. Margaery said furiously, her hands clasping her pregnant belly. Does he mean to disinherit our child before it is even born? Her husband looked up at her. I misspoke, a regent then to hold the kingdom together should I fall. To be a figurehead until our child comes of age. Catelyn interceded. It is not necessary, Rob, we have Lord Umber, Sir Brynden, and Ed Muir. She glanced at Margaery, to say nothing of Lord Tyrell and Randil Tarly. Rob looked sadly at his mother. Mother, you have just named 5 people. They all can't rule. With all these lords and commanders, there needs to be a central figurehead. You told me that when they thrust the crown upon me. The Queen watched Lady Catelyn redden. Very well, you must name someone to be Lord Protector until your child comes of age. Ideally someone of the blood. She looked apologetically at Margaery. I'm sorry, your grace, but the North will not accept an overlord from the Reach. Not when they've just gained independence from the Iron Throne. Margaery could do nothing but nod. I am just a broodmare, someone to produce heirs. It would never occur to them to ask me what I think. Catelyn went on. Your father's father had no siblings, but you have distant kin in the Vale, a Waynwood and Corbray for certain. Mother, Rob interrupted sharply, you forget. My father had 4 sons. It was clear from her expression that Catelyn had not forgotten. Her jaw worked for a moment as if repressing a rebuke. A Snow is not a Stark. Snow. Jon Snow. Rob would pass the throne to a bastard. Jon is more a Stark than a lordling from the Vale who has never set eyes on Winterfell. Jon is a man of the Night's Watch. Catelyn argued, his vows are for life. I am aware, but I am certain an accommodation can be made with Lord Commander Mormont. Rob Margaery spoke uneasily. Jon is a bastard, bastards cannot inherit. Beside her, Catelyn nodded stiffly. Not unless they are legitimized by royal decree. Rob stated, straightening. Margaery stared. She was about to angrily respond when Catelyn spoke up. If you do that, it can never be undone. What if, when the time comes, he refuses to step aside for your true-born heir? He could have children of his own. Do you suppose he'll step aside? Margaery and your child will never be safe. Rob blinked. Jon would never hurt a child of mine. No more than Theon would harm Bran or Rickon. Catelyn said, her voice rising. Enough. Rob said. The decision has been made. Jon is my choice. Lord Karstark and Lady Mormont ride in a few hours with my decree. Margaery was in her chambers, readying herself for the upcoming wedding. Her handmaidens were busying themselves around her as usual. They had fitted her into a beautiful shimmering gown of blue and green silk, They were just readying the jewelry for her inspection when there was a knock at the door. Myra answered it and then turned to the Queen. "Your Grace, Maester Lewin is here to see you." The Queen sighed. Was it too much to ask that she be granted a moment's peace? "Let him in, Myra." The girl stood aside and Lewin entered, carrying a cushion on which was an object, covered in a silk gauze. The Maester nodded gratefully to Margary's handmaidens and then addressed the Queen. "Thank you for seeing me, Your Grace." The Maester looked at the frantic activity occupying the small space of the small chambers Margary had been given by the Frizz. "I know you are very busy, but the King bade me to present you with a gift." "A gift?" Margary stepped away from her mirror and looked at her visitor. "What would the King be giving to me?" "Please assist me, child," Maester Lewin asked Saya, who was standing nearby. The girl put out her hands and relieved the old stark retainer of the cushion. Lewin stepped back and took a corner of the silk wrapping. "His Grace would have you wear this." The Maester whipped away the gauze. Margary came closer to get a look, though she could already see what it was. On the cushion nestled an ornate crown. In some ways it was a facsimile of the crown that Rob wore in that it had a circlet at its base that was surmounted by spikes, but whereas the King's crown was bronze and iron, Margary's was pure gold. Instead of 9 spikes there was 7. The circlet was engraved with flowers and the Queen saw that the spikes had elaborate silver curls representing vines twisted around them. It was a softer version of the crown of winter. "It is His Grace's pleasure to call this the crown of summer, my Queen," Maester Lewin said, a smile upon his face. "King Rob is well aware that his crown represents the ice of winter and autumn, fitting for a king at war. But he hopes that the crown of the Queen will represent the growth and renewal of spring and summer." The Queen reached out a hand and touched the crown. She saw that each of the 7 spikes had a small gem embedded in the gold. Each one was a different color, representing the 7 great houses of Westeros. And the 7 gods. "It's a clever design. Well, provided you omit the Greyjoys and replace it with House Tully." Margary was speechless. She looked at the gift in wonder. Then a dark worm of suspicion took root in her mind. Her head came up. "When did the King commission this?" she asked. Lewin's smile did not falter. "King Rob left orders with the smithy at Riverrun before he left for the Western campaign. The blacksmiths there worked day and night to have it ready for his return. Before the Westerlands," Margary said quietly, almost to herself. "Before the crag," she might have added. "Indeed." The Maester bowed and made as if to leave, but then he turned back. "Forgive me, my Queen, I know that things between the King and yourself are tense of late, but King Rob was insistent that you be presented with this for the wedding. He said that he wanted you to know that, no matter what happens, you remain his Queen and consort." Margary fought back tears. She saw Myra and Saya eyeing the crown open-eyed. "Thank the King," she said. "It is a gift I shall treasure beyond all others." The wedding was a lavish affair. The entire host of Rob's bannermen from the North and Riverlands had assembled to attend. The twins' small September was packed with lords both high and low. Doubtless the twins had never seen such a list of dignitaries. Lord Walder must be beside himself. All the lords of the region have arrived at the twins to pay his daughter homage as the new wife of the Riverlords. God's willing it never will again. This is a dreary place with no joy. How can a place that practically overflows with family members be so cold and lifeless? As was their right, Margary and Rob had been placed in the foremost line nearest the septon during the ceremony, the place reserved for family and close friends. The royal couple stood with Lady Catelyn and the Blackfish, among many others, as they watched Lord Walder hobble up the aisle in the center of the lords, escorting his daughter to her new husband. Edmure Tully looked every bit the liege lord, waiting by the septon clad in his finest clothes and carrying the ancestral cloak of House Tully under one arm. He tried to keep his face straight as he watched his intended approach down the long aisle of the September, but he failed miserably. Margary's heart went out to him as the groom broke into a wide grin as Roslyn neared the front of the aisle. Though she was looking down shyly, Roslyn seemed to be smiling as well, tears coming from her eyes. "It reminds me of my wedding day, gods, I was so happy." Smiling, Margary looked to the side and caught Rob's eye. The King had been watching his uncle, but he seemed to sense her eyes on him and he looked up and met her look. For a moment they held each other's gaze and smiled. Things were so much simpler just a few months ago. Anger flared from deep within. Since then he slept with another woman, put my family in danger, both at home and the Westerlands, tried to disinherit my child and then tried to butt me off with Trinket. Margaery knew she was being harsh, that Robb's choice of regent was in fact a smart one, despite Lady Catelyn's misgivings, but she still felt a well of bitterness with her. Even she had to admit the crown was a lovely gesture. A symbol from the king that she was his queen, a partner in her husband's endeavors. Two parts of a whole. But she could not shake the thought that he had only given it to her to make up for his betrayal. And yet, despite it all, I still love him. I know he has it within him to be a great king. She touched her belly. Though whether he can be a great husband and father remains to be seen. Though, looking into her husband's deep blue eyes, she felt her misgivings fall away. Could he really be false? Is it all an act? No, I can't, I won't believe it. For a long moment each looked into the other's eyes. Their longing look was interrupted when the Septon cleared his throat and began the ceremony. The spell was broken. Reluctantly the king and queen looked around and turned their attention to the bride and groom. The service went ahead like so many had before it. The Septon spoke the words and Edmure cloaked Roslyn free in the colors of his house and brought her under his protection. The two then faced the front and joined hands. Together they recited the words. Father, mother, warrior, maiden, smith, crone, stranger. The next section of words was altered depending on the speaker. Edmure Tully had the stronger voice and his words carried all the way to the back of the September. I am hers and she is mine for this day until the end of our days. At her side, unseen by all the rest, Robb's fingers sought hers and the two touched softly as they watched quietly, each lost in their own private thoughts. The drums were pounding again and again. The constant beat shaking the hall. An ominous accompaniment to the revelry going on within. They had passed Lord Walder in the hall on their way in, escorted by Black Walder and host Ainfrey, a burly strong man who looked out of place in this gathering of noble lords. Their host had looked almost happy, smiling widely as the king passed. He even bowed his head slightly. As he looked up, the Lord of the Crossing's smile became yet wider as he eyed Robb's crown. Some would say it's a poor king who crowns himself with bronze, your grace. Margaery felt Robb tense at her side. Bronze and iron are stronger than gold and silver. He answered, his tone defensive. The old kings of winter wore such a sword crown. The old man laughed dryly. Small good it did them when the dragons came. He he. He looked at the crown of summer that neatly sat on Margaery's head. I see that your queen has more taste than you, your grace. That will always be the case, my lord. Robb said coldly, though with a hint of a smile towards his wife. Lord Walder bowed again and allowed himself to be led away by members of his family. Robb shook his head and escorted Margaery inside the hall. Everyone in attendance stood and cheered as Robb and Margaery entered the feast. Lords high and low cheered as their king arrived. They walked slowly to their seats, waving to the people around them. They passed the lines of feast tables towards the far end of the hall near the high table that was reserved for the bride and groom, and their immediate family. Ahead of them they saw Lord Walder take his place on the raised dais. As he sat next to his daughter, he bestowed upon her a loving smile as he nestled into the black iron throne. Margaery's husband pulled out her chair and allowed her to sit before he took his own place beside her. She deliberately kept her eyes on the musicians, trying hard not to look in his direction. She didn't want to convey the impression that she cared whether he wanted to talk to her or not. But gods, do I want to talk to him. Damn him. She could see others looking her way. Saw Lady Catelyn at the table opposite theirs pretending to be engaged in conversation with her uncle while giving her looks. Everywhere she looked she saw the multitude of onlookers staring at the king and queen. Some were being more subtle in their attentions, but still she saw them. She refused to pay them any mind. The feasting began, course after course of food with large measures of wine and ale to wash it down. Soon the celebration was in full swing. The queen felt her attention being drawn to the balcony above the dais where the musicians who had been engaged for this event were situated. The players were good, there was no doubt about it. They each played their instruments with skill and vigor, changing songs with the barest pause. Robb stirred beside her. My queen. She subtly titled her head in the king's direction while keeping her gaze fixed firmly on the raised dais. It was a gesture to say she's heard but still let him know that she was not to be disturbed. The king's fingers brushed the back of her hand. Margaery. The voice was low, hushed, tinged with vulnerability and longing. The constant ache that had eaten away at her for weeks overruled her anger and hurt. Despite herself she turned her head and looked to her side. Robb sat, in his finest clothes, every inch the warrior king his men believed him to be. Though, to her, he was just Robb, her husband. The man to whom I pledged my life to. The one who pledged his life to me, she thought, anger burning inside her. Robb was looking at her with an intense look of sadness on his handsome face. His fingers stopped stroking hers, instead reaching across so that he could enclose the back of her hand with the palm of his own. He squeezed gently. His eyes sought hers and he smiled tentatively. She did not return it, though she wanted to. He's probably in his cups and is filled with lust. She cursed herself for the way she had acted during the wedding ceremony. I thought we'd had a moment, but I was wrong. At the head of the hall, Walder Free held up his hand for silence. Instantly the noise was cut off and the hall became still. The old man smiled slyly. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Robb. "The Septon has said his prayers, the words have been said, and Lord Edmure has wrapped my daughter in his cloak, but—" The crowd jeered in anticipation. Roslyn cast a fearful look at her father and her new husband. Lord Walder cackled along with the others. "But they are not yet man and wife. A sword needs a sheath, and a wedding needs a bedding." The hall went up. Men pounded the tables and cheered uproariously. Smiling grimly, Robb stood. "Then by all means, my lord, let them be wed." The guests scrambled forward and hoisted Edmure and Roslyn into the air, part carrying, part dragging them from the hall, ripping their clothes as they went, shouting bawdy jests and laughing merrily. Neither Margaery nor Robb made to follow. "It's a barbaric custom," she thought, looking at Roslyn's frightened face. "I thank the gods that Robb and I did not have to go through it." Within moments the bride and groom had been taken outside and deposited in the bedding chamber. The guests started to slowly filter back into the hall. Long moments passed, then Black Walder stepped up to the heavy wooden door and pulled them shut with a firm clang. The musicians changed song once again. With a surprise she realized that they were playing the Rains of Castamaria. Who in their right minds thought that would be an appropriate song for a wedding? Behind her she heard the sounds of other heavy door being closed around the hall. Something about that unnerved her, but she paid it no mind. The king sighed and sat down next to her. He regarded her for the longest time. Then, abruptly, his eyes dropped. "I have been terribly foolish," he uttered quietly. The simple statement floored her. Margaery was used to the intrigues of courtly life, the subtlety of words both heard and unheard. The blunt talk of the Northerners threw her at the best of times, but this was something else. She surveyed him, evaluating. Is that a confession? Or is he just drunk? You expect me to disagree? She wouldn't make this easier for him. King or no, if he had betrayed her there would be consequences. Robb swallowed. He did not look up. No, not at all. He drew a shuddering breath. To Margaery's astonishment there was the beginnings of tears in his eyes. There was an uneasy silence. When she did not respond further, Robb risked a glance upwards. He smiled thinly, though it was a ghost of a thing appearing and vanishing in an instant. "It's funny, I can stand on the battlefield and face death 100 times and not flinch. But here, in front of you, my courage deserts me." "Well, you were man enough to seek comfort in the arms of another woman." Margaery seethed. "I suggest," she responded in a clipped tone, "that you find your steel, my king." That last was full of scorn. "Gods know you have in other ways." Robb nodded, ignoring her jibe. He took a deep breath. "I should never have acted the way I did." "Specifically?" Margaery asked. Why was she insisting on his confessing his betrayal? "Do I take pleasure in torturing myself? I let my pride get the better of me." "Pride? What about your cock?" "I think the pride is the least of your sins, your grace." Margaery spat. Robb looked wild-eyed. He gaped her at for a moment and then his face set. "You are still determined to believe the worst of me, aren't you?" He shook his head. To listen to others and believe what they say rather than ask me yourself. Gods be good, he almost looks hurt. Truly, he could have been a master mummer rather than a king. I did ask you. You didn't actually. Rob interjected, his grip on her hand tightened. You accused me without asking for the truth. She thought back. By the gods, I didn't. I was so angry I just cut into him without asking for an explanation. Her anger flared. Well, regardless, he could have denied it but he didn't, made a big point of not denying it as a matter of fact. She tried to pull away from Rob but the king held fast to her hand. He was so strong that it was barely any effort for him to keep her in place. Margaery could not risk making a scene with so many onlookers, so she shot him an angry look and then remained staring ahead. Look at me. Her husband's voice said. It was a command, not a request. Margaery refused. She kept her gaze locked firmly on the high table where Walder Free was talking to his much younger wife. Margaery, look at me. This time the voice was softer, more emotional. Hating herself for her weakness, Margaery turned her head and looked at Rob. His earnest blue eyes bore into hers. Her husband looked intently at her. I promise you, on the life of our unborn child, I have never been untrue to you. He seems so honest. Margaery felt her resolve weaken, but she wasn't about to let him off that easy. Words are wind, Rob Stark. Oaths and promises are nothing. Deeds are what matter. An exasperated look came over Rob's face. What more can I say? I can't prove a negative. Do you deny that the Westerling girl visited you in your room? Rob sucked in a deep breath of air. I do not deny it. He replied calmly. She turned to face him fully. And do you deny that she visited you at all hours of the night? No, the king said firmly. Again, I do not deny it. Margaery supposed she had won, but it tasted exactly like, if not worse than, defeat. So she responded slowly. If you were me, what conclusion would you take from such an admission? Rob's eyes flickered. I would like to think you'd have more faith in me than that. Like what, Rob? By the gods, you've given me nothing else to think. Rob's eyes flashed in anger. 7 hells, Margaery, I was injured, Jane was tending to me, nothing else. She grit her teeth when he said tending. So you never lay with her? The question was out there and could no longer be ignored. Never. Rob said firmly, staring unblinking into her eyes. She tended my wound, replaced the dressing and talked with me. That was all. One would think the Crag's Maester could have performed that service better. Margaery pointed out, her voice leaden with suspicion. Rob shook his head angrily. The Crag's Maester was killed in the fight for the keep. He took a stray arrow during the battle. Neither side knew who'd killed him. The Queen's eyes narrowed. And the young Westerling girl was the best you could up with. That's highly convenient, Your Grace. The only person who could tend to the king was a young girl who was probably a virgin. Though I doubt it. She couldn't help that last. Rob's eyes tightened, she could see him fighting for calm. Please, Margaery. Say what you like about me, but leave Jane out of it. Why, Rob? She demanded sharply. Is she precious to you? The king took in another calming breath. She was good to me when I needed it most. Good. The Queen's voice went up an octave, drawing the attention of some of the nearest revelers who sent quizzical looks their way. Not like that. Rob said quickly, realizing how his comment had been misconstrued. We had nobody with us experienced in medicine, so she did the best she could. Later, I received news about Bran and Rickon. Rob paused as he swallowed. I have never been more upset. More low. The knowledge that I left them exposed in Winterfell was more that I can stand. He glanced down, it still is. She couldn't help it, her hand rotated to take Rob's fingers in hers. Her other hand came across the table to land on the king's. She could feel his pulse through the thin material of his tunic. Even so, we did nothing but talk. Margaery so wanted to believe him, but the doubt lingered, burrowed deep like a maggot in an apple. But you were still alone with her? No. Rob sighed, exasperated. I was never alone with her. I never have been. Her head spun, her eyes widened in surprise. Never. No. My honor guard were not about to let me be injured and alone with the daughter of an enemy. Rob smiled slightly. They are ridiculously protective of me. Never alone. Margaery repeated almost to herself. She looked up. What was this about visits I heard about? The ones late at night. I needed my dressing changed. But even then I was never alone with her. Rob said firmly. Even after Lord Westerling bent the knee. The Smallgen, Robert Glover, Roderick Forrester, Daisy Mormont, even your brother took turns guarding me. Rob looked at her shyly. They even stayed in the room when I slept. Oh. The expression sounded stupid, even to her. For a moment she had considered this was a lie but then realized that Garland would arrive from Harrenhal soon. If her husband was lying it was a damn foolish lie. Garland would never lie to her, even for his king. She realized she had been a fool. Rushing to conclusions without any facts. Even now though, a lingering doubt remained. Why didn't you just tell me this to start off with? Her voice was rising again. I've been angry with you for weeks. Her husband looked at her shyly. I was foolish, my queen. I was so looking forward to seeing you, so happy to discover you're carrying our child. And then, after so long you were there in front of me, close enough to touch. But instead of being happy to see me you attacked me, accused me of terrible things. My pride got the better of me. I was hurt that you would listen to the mutterings of others before you would talk to me. He sighed. That you didn't have faith in me. We'd been married less than a day before you left me to go to war. Margaery pointed out, her feeling the fool only increasing with every word her husband spoke. I should have realized. Perhaps I would look better in a fool's rags than in this fine silk gown. The king nodded. I know, and if the situation was reversed I'd feel much the same. He looked across the hall. Believe me, my mother has had quite a few words with me about my pride. I was rude and stubborn. Please forgive me. Margaery wavered, she could feel her husband's pulse against her fingertips. It was strong and vibrant. Rob reached over and placed his remaining hand over hers. He looked straight at her. I would never betray you. He said, conviction suffusing his voice. I would die first. Her grandmother had always taught her to trust her instincts, to believe in them if nothing else. And there, in the great hall of the twins as she felt the steady rhythm of her husband's pulse. A beat almost in time with her own. Margaery was convinced. I know. She breathed softly. A hand breaking the embrace and touching his cheek. I believe you. They kissed tenderly. It was the first time they had been so close since Rob had arrived at Riverrun. Margaery almost melted in the kiss, she was about to push in further and damn propriety when a voice rang out across the hall. Your Grace. The music died off, as abruptly as a flame deprived of air. Lord Walder had stood from his place on the high table. That's odd, I thought the old leech would have rather stayed sitting, he did earlier. Margaery chided herself for being uncharitable, she was just irked that something had come between her and reconciliation with her husband. Your Grace, please. Robb Stark stood at the invitation. He made to walk round the table, his hand started to slip from hers. She reached up quickly and ensnared her fingers in his. I have only just got him back. I won't lose him for anything, especially not for that old goat who probably just wants to offer another toast. When he felt her refusing to budge, Robb glanced down in surprise, but Margaery merely gave him a sweet smile in reply. Grinning, the king stayed put, standing by his chair. He looked up at the high table. My lord? He asked politely, though the way he squeezed her hand, Margaery could tell his mind was elsewhere. Lord Walder looked down at the king. Your Grace, I fear I've been remiss in my duties. I've given you meat and wine and music, but I haven't shown you the hospitality you deserve. My king has married and I owe my new queen a wedding gift. While the words were pleasant, the sly smile and malicious glint in the eye of the old man unnerved Margaery. From somewhere off to the side she heard the sound of an open palm slapping a face. Robb. Margaery's twisted to look and saw Catelyn Stark with her hand raised, Edwin freewheeling backwards from the blow she'd just delivered. What in the name of? She made out the scrape of a chair as it was moved across the stone floor, heard the sound of approaching steps. Out of the corner of her eye, Marjorie detected movement. Her head whirled to see lame Lothar Free looming over her, a sadistic grin in his eye, malevolence all over his face. A flash of steel drew her attention. She saw that the crippled man had a knife in one hand. Its edge sharp and cruel-looking. Before she could react, Lothar was at her side and he was thrusting the crude weapon at her belly. "My baby." The world seemed to move in slow motion, as if everything was immersed in water. She knew she should move, get out the way, scream for help, claw her attacker's face, anything. But she was too slow and the weapon was there, bright and gleaming, the promise of a quick death to those it was wielded against. It sped towards her, unimpeded, and she could do nothing to stop it. Margaery Tyrell was too slow and Lothar Free was too fast. Much too fast. Robb Stark was faster. Before she could even register what was happening, her husband pulled her away from the incoming danger, their interlocked fingers giving him the purchase to wrench her out of the chair and towards the safety of the floor. It was a desperate move and not one the young king would have done had he had a choice. As it was, Robb created a small space, room enough for him to get between his wife and the man who would have ended her life. She hit the floor, instinct telling her to let her side and knees take the blow rather than her stomach. Pain flared, but she managed to protect her child. Looking up, Margaery saw the expression on Lothar's face go from one of cruel triumph to one of surprise. The cripple had no more time to do anything else, he was off balance and, without a target, he collided with the table. Lothar tried to reorient himself to push himself away from danger, but the second of hesitation dedicated to the mad scramble was all he had. Then the king was on him. Robb lashed out, striking the man hard across the face. He hammered a fist into the man's stomach, doubling him up, driving the air from his lungs. The king reached quickly, grabbed the knife from Lothar's numb fingers before he dropped it onto the floor and then, in the next instant, rammed the sharp instrument into the throat of his wife's attacker. Blood exploded from Lothar's throat as Robb drove the dagger home. For a fraction of a second the two were locked in an embrace. Then Robb ripped the dagger through the side of Lothar's neck and let the man fall to the floor. The Free thrashed about, trying to staunch the terrible gash in his throat. Blood went everywhere as the man convulsed like a fish out of water. The man tried to scream, to make a sound from the ruin of his throat, but nothing came forth. After a brief moment the man went still, blood continuing to pour through the gaping wound. For an instant the world stood still. Robb glanced at her, but then his attention was drawn to something else. Margaery followed his gaze and saw that Lord Walder had signaled to the balcony. The musicians at the front bent down and emerged carrying crossbows, dispensing their lutes for more dangerous instruments. The arrowheads gleaming in the torchlight. As one they aimed at her and Robb. Margaery tried to move, but she could think of nowhere to escape to. She wanted to get under the table but knew that would offer no protection from the assassins. Panic overwhelmed her, she knew they would fire at any moment and she was trapped out in the open. Suddenly, Robb was kneeling by her side, enclosing her in an embrace and turning her round so his own back faced the high table. The sound of crossbows firing rent the air. Robb's body jerked forward as it was hit. The king shuddered, but he did not let go of his wife. Margaery looked up into his face. Robb's eyes were closed, serene. He could have been sleeping. For a horrible moment she thought him slain, but then he stirred and opened his eyes. He looked at her, calm. "Get to safety," he said, pain in his voice. "Where can we go?" "We're surrounded, Robb," it was all she could think of to say. "I'll take care of that," Robb said, his words coming in pain-filled gasps. "Just get out. You're all that matters." She could feel tears in her eyes. "What? No time," Robb hissed, "just stay down and get out when you can." The king rose to his feet. Margaery saw him suck in a breath. Smaljin, the biggest, strongest man in the north, came thundering past them. Between him and Robb they wrestled the feast table off its trestles and threw it onto the floor. The large piece of wood came to rest on its side, kept there by the supports that had held it up. The solid oak wood offering a shield between Margaery and the crossbowman. She crawled against the hard surface. Robb and the Smaljin whirled and faced the room. It was then Margaery saw the devastation going on behind them. It was carnage, a slaughter. While a few of the Frey's household had been busy trying to dispatch the king, the rest of their hosts had attacked the other guests. The northerners and rivermen were trying to fight back, but they were unarmed and unarmored. Margaery saw Robin Flint being ringed by Freys, their daggers rising and falling. Saw Lucas Blackwood cut down by Hostine Free. A member of House Vance was hamstrung by Black Walder as his back was turned dealing with another enemy. Crossbows claimed Owen Norrie, Donal Locke, Robert Glover and half a dozen more. Slowly but surely their allies were dying before them. From the side of the room a free man came running towards Rob's back, his sword raised high, a blood-curdling scream coming from his lips. "Rob!" Margaery screamed in warning. The king moved aside and let the soldier pass. As the man got close, Rob stepped back in and thrust Lothar's knife up into the man's jaw. It wasn't a big enough weapon to go all the way through the skull, but it was enough to penetrate the man's brain and let him drop to the floor without a sound. Rob quickly scooped up the fallen man's sword from the floor and stood ready. They came from all sides. Everywhere Margaery looked was another enemy, a host of demons trying to take her love from her. She looked around for a weapon, a sword, a knife. She was desperate to help. She glanced up to see that Rob was immersed in the fight. He seemed to be everywhere at once, parrying, hacking and stabbing. Men were falling all around, his face was set, he grit his teeth and laid waste to his enemies around him. But they still kept coming. Another volley of crossbow bolts flew into the assembled guests. The queen pulled her knees into her body as bolts thudded into the wood of the table protecting her. Behind her Margaery saw Wendell Marndaly take one through the back of the neck, the force driving him to the floor. The Great Jon and Small Jon fought a path so they could be beside Rob. Father and son stood without weapons taking on their foes as the Freys milled around them hacking and slashing. The huge men punched and kicked at any man that came too close. While she watched, the Great Jon suddenly grabbed a Frey, and bit down hard into his ear. The man screamed and thrashed as the Great Jon bit down to the bone and then ripped the ear of the man's face before throwing him hard into a group of attacking Freys. Gods, let these please not be the only ones of Rob's honor guard left. Without warning, both men suddenly took crossbow hits. The Great Jon staggered backwards, a quarrel deep in his side. A sword flashed and the big man fell, blood flowing from a wound in his throat. Seeing his father slain, the Small Jon went berserk. He bludgeoned a Frey across the face with a leg of mutton. He tried to reach his sword belt, but two more bolts took him through the hand and leg. He dropped to one knee, roaring in pain and frustration. From the sides of the room more Freys entered along with a host of other soldiers. These men were clad in steel from heel to helm and all were armed with heavy long axes. "Mercy!" someone cried. More of the hall's side doors opened as if in answer to the plea. Soldiers piled into the room, mailed men in the shaggy fur cloaks of the north. Northmen! Margaery's heart soared. We're saved. The thought lasted for less than a heartbeat before one of the would-be rescuers struck the Small Jon's head off with two huge blows of his axe. Hope blew out like a candle in a storm. The king now stood alone in the center of the room, striking any who tried to get at him or his wife. Robb Stark fought as he never had before. Margaery had seen many tourney fights in her life. Was used to a certain level of violence, but this was something else. Robb's swordplay was unequaled, his determination unrivaled. The enemy did not let up but came again and again against the young wolf, only to find the king was more than a match for each of them. She feared that at any moment more crossbow bolts would rain down on them and she would be forced to watch Robb be killed right in front of her. But none came. She risked a glance over the table to see that the balcony was in the midst of its own struggle. Some large warrior had climbed the wall and thrown themselves into the group of musicians turned assassins. Margaery saw a shock of blonde hair as the crossbowmen tried to fight back against their attacker. Lady Brian. Knowing that, for now, the crossbowmen were being dealt with, Margaery turned her attention to the hall. The enemy surrounded the semicircle of the table like dogs hunting down a bear. They edged forward only to be interrupted by a slash or hack as Robb tried to keep them at bay. Margaery saw that her husband had a score of wounds. Blood ran down his face and chest. There was a quarrel caught in his arm that made it difficult for him to raise his sword arm. The king looked like something from a nightmare. But for all his wounds and fatigue, the king in the north would not be felled. No matter who came at them, Robb intercepted, forcing his attackers to retreat under his ferocity. Though the king moved quickly, he never moved more than a meter or two from the center of the room. Tears welled in her eyes. He fights for me. Her hand went to her belly. For us. But, she knew it couldn't last. Up till now their enemy had attacked haphazardly, they had not expected the young wolf to survive their initial assault. This was understandable, it was a miracle that Rob was still standing. However, Rob couldn't press the attack without leaving her, and that he would not do. All it would take was one lucky strike and her husband would fall, and that was coming, it was just a matter of time. Margaery grabbed a fallen dagger, she started to get to her feet. If this is to be my end, let me be standing, fighting, as pathetic a warrior as I may be. Lord Walder. Suddenly the phrase stopped edging forwards and halted. Margaery risked another glance at the high table where Lord Walder had been watching events play out before him. The old man had raised his hand to stay his men. From the corners of the room, Catelyn Stark edged forward, her arm was tight around the wife of the latest Lady Free. In her other hand was a knife, an instrument more for cutting bread than flesh. Enough. Catelyn tightened her grip on the petrified girl. Enough, I say. Let it end. She pressed the knife deep into her prisoner's throat. It was only then that the sound of a drumbeat could be heard in the distance. A constant rhythm that portended death and destruction. Please, Catelyn said, tears streaming down her face. He is my son. My first son, and my last. Let him and his wife go. Let them go, and I swear we will forget this, forget all you've done here. Let them go, and I swear by the old gods and the new. Margaery's good mother swallowed. We will take no vengeance. The queen used the side of the table to get to her feet, her own knife clutched in her hand. She saw Lord Walder peer at Catelyn mistrustfully. What is this blather? Let them go. Catelyn implored. Keep me for a hostage. Edmure too if you haven't killed him. The drumbeat continued in the distance. Small chance of that. Lord Walder cackled. But why would I let your son and his whore leave? Catelyn pressed her blade deeply into the throat of the girl. On my honor as a Tully, she told Lord Walder, on my honor as a Stark, let them go or I will cut your wife's throat. Walder Free looked shrewdly at Lady Catelyn. Finally he reached for his goblet and settled back into his chair. I'll find another, he said dismissively. There was a pause, and then the meaning of Lord Walder's words became clear to all. Lady Free squirmed in Catelyn Stark's grip. Out of nowhere a man in dark armor and a pale pink cloak spotted with blood came to stand before Rob. He was surrounded by enemy soldiers. Tywin Lannister sends his regards. The man's voice said, cold and lifeless. The enemy started forward, only to be stopped by the thunderclap of wood being smashed. The enemy spun to see the great doors of the feast hall being bent asunder as something outside smashed repeatedly against them. With an almighty crash the wood gave and the great doors were blown inwards. In the doorway stood the figure of Randil Tully. The warrior was clad in armor, his Valyrian greatsword, heartspan, unslung and gripped with both hands. He was flanked by Brynden Tully, Garlan and Loras Tyrell, along with a host of Northern, Riverland and Tyrell men. The Lord of Hornhill hefted his blood-soaked sword. Fury was etched into every line of his weathered face. He pointed down the hall towards Rob and Margaery. To the king. Notes. Everything in this chapter will be explained. Next up, Catelyn's side of the wedding. Chapter 36, Catelyn v. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Chaos reigned. She flattened herself against the wall and surveyed the carnage in front of her. The armored men of houses Tully, Stark and Tyrell had smashed into the foe in front of them, and the fighting was bitter and hard. Somewhere in the midst of the fighting, Joyous Free was escaping. Catelyn didn't care where she went. She had no interest in killing the girl. She was an innocent in this, relatively speaking. Catelyn had been almost reluctant as she dragged her from her hiding place amongst the upturned tables and presented her to her husband. She had merely wanted to use the girl as a hostage to secure Rob and Margaery's release. Now that it was clear the Walder Free didn't care whether his wife lived or died, Catelyn was glad the girl had struggled free of her grasp when their rescuers had arrived into the room. What was happening? How had it come to this? Catelyn tried to wrap her head round it. To understand the events of the last few minutes. But, try as she might, she could make no sense of it. A few moments ago I was sat with Uncle Bryndon and Roose Bolton. The next, people are dying all around me. Her suspicions were first aroused when the main doors to the hall were shut. It had made little sense to Caitlin. Not all the guests had returned from the bawdy procession that carried Edmure and Rosalind to the bedding chamber. Why shut the doors? Caitlin's thoughts had been interrupted by a conversation between her Uncle Bryndon and Lord Bolton. She had turned her attention to the two men just as the Lord of the Dreadfort refused a servant's attempts to refill his goblet. "Some water," the man commanded. Caitlin watched the servant quickly flee the intense gaze of the Northman. "Do you not partake, Lord Bolton?" Caitlin had asked, trying to distract him. Lord Bolton turned slightly in his seat. He regarded her with cold dead eyes. "Never do, my lady. Dulls the senses." Beside her Bryndon Tully snorted. "That's the point," he exclaimed as he reached for a pitcher of ale. Roose Bolton's mouth twitched in acknowledgement at the attempt at humor. The Blackfish settled the pitcher down. "Didn't you marry one of these free girls?" Caitlin looked at surprise at Lord Bolton. The man's face was deadpan. "I. Lord Walder let me choose any of his granddaughters and promised me the girl's weight in silver as a dowry. So I have a fat young bride." Sir Bryndon barked in laughter. "Marriage should not be laughing matter. I hope she makes you very happy," Caitlin said seriously. Roose Bolton's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "Well, she's made me very rich." Bryndon Tully laughed loudly. Caitlin merely watched cautiously. "Lord Bolton is not joking, it's purely a transaction as far as he's concerned. I feel for his new bride." She was about to say something when she felt the presence of something behind her. "My lady." Caitlin turned and had to crane her neck to properly see the woman's face. Her sworn shield, Brian of Tarth, was there. Sang armor, the woman looked out of place in the finery of the hall. "Lady Brian." The lady grimaced at the expression. "Gods be good, she's told me enough times that Brian will suffice." After a moment's hesitation the woman went on. "Pardon my lady, but I wanted to ensure you had any need of me tonight. If so, I was wondering if I might retire to my chambers." Ever the dutiful warrior. Caitlin's heart went out to her. "She'd stay all night if I commanded it." "No thank you, Brian, I have everything I need, enjoy the rest of your evening." The tall warrior nodded her thanks. Brian offered a small bow and then turned in the direction of the main door. Realizing it had been shut, she changed direction and went for one of the side doors that led towards the kitchens. People's eyes followed her, some gawking at her immense size. Caitlin shot them a steely glare. "She's a warrior more than a lady. I need to remind her that she's my sworn shield, not a servant." "Pardon, my lord, my lady," Bryndon Tully said as he rose from his chair. "I need to find a tree to piss on." Caitlin shook her head and gave her uncle a look of mock condemnation as he made his way from the hall in the same direction as Brian. Ahead of her the musicians on the dais started to play the Rains of Castamaria. Caitlin had seen Margaery look up at them in confusion before being distracted by Robb. Like the girl, Caitlin had shared her misgivings. Why in the name of the Seven play a song that was connected to a Lannister triumph over their foes at a wedding involving their enemies? Once again she was distracted, this time by the intense conversation going on between her son and his wife. The royal couple looked to be arguing softly. She shook her head in anger and despair. This idea that Robb has been unfaithful is just a nonsense, rumors spread by soldiers with nothing better to do than indulge in barrackroom gossip. There had been a dark moment, within the seconds after she had heard the rumor as it went round Riverrun, that she had considered that her son might have been betrayed his wife. That he had truly been as stupid and callow as to have been unfaithful. The reaction of Margaery to the rumors had been horrifying to watch. The girl, intelligent, happy and vibrant, had become withdrawn, barely leaving her rooms for anything, save the most important council meetings. Even then she rarely said anything. The Queen had seemed to be going through a crisis of confidence, one that she was unwilling to discuss, even with Caitlin. It wasn't until she had seen the pain in Margaery's eyes that she had realized how much the Rose of Highgarden loved her son. "And I am certain Robb loves her." The determination had crystallized things in Caitlin's mind. She had dismissed the rumors as the baseless filth she knew they were. Rob would never do such a thing. Ned taught him honor and loyalty. He would never rut with some wench just because she was available. I won't believe it. Put the two together, let them talk, and they will resolve this whole messy business. Then Rob returned to Riverrun and she had been convinced that things would be put right. Unfortunately the opposite was true. Caitlin had been staggered that the ill feelings hadn't been dispelled when Rob and Margaery had finally reunited. Instead they had quarreled furiously and things had been made worse. Caitlin had tried to intervene but her son had made clear that this was his marriage and her involvement was not welcome. Caitlin sighed. Men are such pig-headed things. Still, she reflected. They are very young and newly married. They have not had time to build the trust and understanding that love requires. Without warning, Rob and Margaery suddenly smiled at each other. They leaned forward and kissed with passion. Caitlin's heart soared. Finally. Movement to the side distracted her. Daisy Mormont, the only female warrior in Rob's honor guard, had stepped forward and asked Edwin Free to dance. The man had recoiled as if she'd insulted him and pulled away from her. Not now, he said, much too loudly. Caitlin stood, frowning. What does he think he's doing? What could Daisy possibly have done to warrant such disrespect? Daisy stepped back looking stricken. Caitlin pushed past her, pausing only to offer a reassuring pat to the younger woman's shoulder. She offered a smile and then carried on to reach Edwin Free. She reached out to grasp the man's arm. What she found made her blood freeze. Under the tunic she felt heavy mail rings, concealed beneath the bulky clothing on top of it. Caitlin realized that everyone else was standing. She became aware that Walder Free was addressing the hall. A moment of horrible clarity gripped her. The closing doors. The playing of the Lannister victory song, Edwin Free armored for battle. Something was terribly wrong here. Acting on instinct she reached out and slapped the face of the man in front of her with as much force as she could muster. Edwin stepped back quickly, an odd look of fear and hatred crossed his face. Then he was swallowed in the crowd. She whirled, shouted a warning, Rob. Caitlin saw Lothar Free striding haltingly to her son's feast table, his weapon drawn. She started forward but then fighting seemingly broke out all across the hall. The table in front of her exploded as men grappled and fought. It took a moment for her to realize that the Frees were the ones who had instigated the violence. That their hosts had set about attacking their guests. She saw a boy wearing the sigil of House Glover go down. His back marked with crossbow bolts. Caitlin looked up and saw the musicians on the balcony with crossbows in hands opening fire on the crowd. She senses, then saw one take aim at her. She tried to move but was rooted to the spot as the man took aim at her chest. Someone shoved her to the side and she hit the floor hard. She looked up to see an unruly mop of blonde hair, as someone threw themselves over her body. Brian. The large woman looked into her eyes. Stay down, my lady. What is happening? Caitlin struggled to get out her words. What? The phrase my lady. Brian exclaimed, still using her own body to shield Caitlin's. They are attacking the king's men all over the castle. Mayhap outside as well. Caitlin cast an eye to the window but could see nothing from place on the floor. Why? Her shield shook her head. Not important now, my lady. We need to get you away from here. Seeing an opening, Brian quickly rose to her feet and pulled Caitlin into the wall. She forced Caitlin's back to the cold surface. A soldier ran past. Brian reached out, snatched his weapon from his hand and then punched the man hard across the face, smashing him to the floor. Now with a sword, Brian seemed reassured. She used one hand to keep Caitlin in place while casting a wary eye about the hall. Everywhere was death. The Freys had caught their guests completely by surprise, leaping on the Northmen and Riverlanders, stabbing and hacking with wild abandon. Caitlin could only watch in horror as men she had known for years, decades even, were cut down viscously, some with no idea what was happening, much less that they were being attacked. Caitlin looked through the milling bodies to see that Rob had pulled Margaery under the cover of a feast table. He settled her with her back against the wood before turning and joining the fray alongside the Smallgen. A lump came to her throat as she saw her eldest son launch into action alongside his men. But the crossbowmen were still there, raining death down from above. Caitlin looked from her son to the balcony where danger beckoned. Making a decision, she leaned forward to speak to Brian. "We need to stop the crossbows." With a practiced eye, Brian took in the scene but made no indication that she had heard. "Brian." The warrior turned her head to face her. "I cannot leave you, my lady." She was not to be deterred. "Can you get up to the balcony?" The other lady looked the balcony over, her eyes trailed the side of the balcony next to which a wall-length tapestry had been set. "I can get there, but..." "Then do it," Caitlin ordered. "Please Brian, don't make me beg." The warrior woman looked back at her, her words were cut off as another volley of crossbow bolts smashed into the defenders. Bodies fell everywhere. Caitlin looked desperately past Brian to see her son still standing and fighting, though the smallgen was down. "Gods, not Rob. Brian. Protect the king." "My lady." Caitlin's thrust her face forward. "Brian, please. My own safety is unimportant. Rob is all that matters to me now." Brian of Tarth looked at her for a moment, then she raised her sword and sprinted from the safety of the wall. Within moments she had leapt onto a feast table, run its length and then jumped onto the tapestry. Bunching the fabric in her hands, she quickly scaled the wall. For a terrible moment Caitlin feared that the worn fabric of the tapestry wouldn't hold the warrior's weight, but, miraculously, hold it did, and, seconds later, the warrior of Tarth was up and over the balcony railing. With a battle cry she scythed into the crossbowman. Caitlin breathed a sigh of relief, then she focused on the center of the room and the still fighting figure of her son. Removing the crossbowman was one thing, but nothing could stop the steady stream of attackers who threw themselves at the king. For the moment the king in the north was holding his own, but it couldn't last forever. Suddenly a side door opened and men garbed in the furs of Northmen entered. For the briefest of moment Caitlin dared to hope that they were saved. That rescue had arrived. Then the arrival struck the head from a wounded smallgen and Caitlin felt hope die within her. "Mercy!" she cried, though no one paid any attention. Desperate, she scanned the room, anxious for a way to help. She observed movement from one of the tables. A furtive head poked out between the wooden trestles at the side to look at events. Joy Ersfrey. Seeing an opportunity, Caitlin had sprung forward to seize the girl. She seized a table knife from the floor as she dragged her hostage from her hiding place. She quickly wrapped an arm around Joyer's throat and set her knife across the artery to still her struggles. "Lord Walder!" she had screamed. Caitlin didn't want to harm the girl, she truly didn't. She had just meant to keep the enemies from her son. She had thought to threaten the old lord of the crossing, hold his wife as a hostage until Rob escaped with Margaery. It did not matter what happened to her after. Only, her threat hadn't worked. Walder Frey did not care what happened to his wife and was not a man to barter with. Not now. Then Roose Bolton had stepped forward. Caitlin could not hear what he said, but the way he brandished his sword at Rob could not have made his intent clearer. She had braced herself, fearing the worst. Then help had arrived. The main doors of the hall splintered and Randil Tarly and a host of others entered the hall, hacking into the Free and Bolton men with a berserker passion. Caitlin saw Loras and Garland Tyrell whirling in tandem, taking out Hosteen Frey's legs and then stabbing him through the chest with both their swords. Joy Ersfrey wriggled free and ran off, sobbing as she fled. Caitlin could see her son still fighting. Though rescue had arrived, there was only so much room in the hall and the Free men were fighting back with everything they had. Gathering herself, she pushed away from the wall and into the melee. She rushed past men fighting and grappling. She moved fast to make herself as difficult a target as possible. A man hit her from the side, his bare fist striking her face with the force of a hammer. She spun and hit the floor, the wind knocked from her lungs by the impact, the knife she had used to threaten Joy Ersfrey spinning away from her. Caitlin looked up to see the man who had hit her had moved to stand above her. The man glared down at her, a savage grin crossing his scarred face. The man hoisted his sword aloft, the metal glinting in the torchlight as he made to bring it down on her. A crossbow bolt took the man through the mouth and punched out through the base of his skull. The warrior tottered uneasily on his feet, his sword slipping from his hand. His eyes rolled into the back of his head before he pitched to the stone floor. The corpse struck the floor next to Caitlin. She stared in shock before looking in the direction of her savior. The bolt had come from the balcony. Her eyes found Brian, who still held the weapon she had used to save Caitlyn's life. The warrior woman nodded with grim satisfaction until she turned to deal with something unseen by Caitlyn's eyes. By the gods, she attacked at least 6 men armed with crossbows and has dispatched them all. Truly she's a wonder. Caitlyn struggled to her feet. I must get to Rob. There was fighting going on all around her, but she paid it little mind. She glanced down at the man who had intended to kill her. She was about to move on before something caught her eye. The leather armor worn by the man had an animal motif on it. Caitlyn bent down quickly to examine it. A squid motif was clearly woven into the fabric. Ironborn. What in the name? Rob. Caitlyn's head jerked up as she heard Margaery scream Rob's name. Through the confusion she saw Rob being tackled to the floor by 2 enemy soldiers. Unable to best her son while he was still standing, a few members of House Free had rushed under his guard and barreled him over. The men grappled on the floor, each scrambling to bring a weapon to bear on the other. She started forward, desperate to reach her son. Some Free soldiers pushed past her, they ignored her, but their bodies knocked her of course. She was now too far away to help the king. Rob had lost his sword. He was fighting with his fists and feet, striking out at the 2 foes who were reaching for their weapons. The king punched one of the men in the face while kicking the other in the abdomen. I must help my son. She ducked around 2 men locked in a fight and approached her son, who had seized one of his attackers by the throat and was squeezing the life from him. The other foe had got hold of his sword and was starting to swing it at her son's unprotected head. Suddenly Margaery was at her husband's side. She stabbed downwards with her own knife. The blade speared the man through the shoulder, lodging there as he cried out in pain. The man's sword dropped from limp fingers. Cursing, he reached over and backhanded the queen across the face. She fell backwards against the table she had been using as a shield. The king snarled and thrust his fist into the throat of the man he'd been holding. Gagging, the free man dropped to the floor. Rob started to get to his feet but was knocked down by the other man's boot as the second attacker kicked him furiously. Seeing his victim fall, the man turned and gathered up his sword in his uninjured arm. He started to thrust down. Caitlyn threw her body at the man who meant to kill her son. Her entire weight impacted the warrior dead center and they toppled over. The man grunted as they both hit the floor. Without a weapon, Caitlyn reached upwards and found the knife that Margaery had left lodged in the man's shoulder. Her fingers closed around the hilt and she twisted savagely. The man threw back his head and howled in pain. Caitlyn wrenched the dagger from her enemy's body and thrust it through his throat. Rasping, the man fell away, clawing at the open wound in his neck. Covered in blood, Caitlyn turned away and crawled to her son. Rob. Her son barely seemed to notice her. He was attempting to rise, but there were injuries all over his body. Blood was flowing from at least a dozen small wounds across his chest. His clothes were ripped and torn, his face awash with blood and sweat. Rob, can you hear me? The king tried once again to get to his feet, but he collapsed onto his back, a muted cry of pain coming from his lips. Margaery came to kneel by her husband's other side. Rob. Her husband reached for her, his fingers griping the back of her head and bringing her ear to his bloody lips. Caitlyn couldn't make out what her son said, but she heard Margaery's response. The girl was crying, tears cascading down her cheeks. No, Rob. I won't leave you. Caitlyn moved close. Rob's eyes were wide as he took in his wife. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words were cut off by a blood-curdling shriek. Margaery and Caitlyn turned their heads to see a Bolton soldier running at them, his sword raised to cut them down. He was mere meters away and closing fast. Caitlyn looked around in desperation for a weapon but could see nothing. She prepared to throw herself between the man and her son. Let striking me down by Rob a few more seconds of life. Then the man was on them. A sword came out of nowhere and entered the attacker's side, caving in his ribs and spearing his heart. The man stayed still, locked in midair, his mouth opened in surprise before he was kicked away from the women on the floor. A knight turned to face them. The man wore heavy plate mail which was splattered in blood and gore. He offered a grim smile. Your graces, my lady. I know this man. Caitlyn thought, but she couldn't remember where from. Father. Myra Forrester arrived at the upturned table. Her dress was torn and covered in specks of blood. A nasty bruise was showing on her left cheek. The knight turned to regard her. Myra. Of course. The Lord of Ironrath. The girl made as if to hug him, but the man held her off. He turned and looked down at Margaery. We must move, your grace. It is too dangerous to be out in the open. Catelyn surveyed the room from her spot on the floor. The fighting around them was fierce. More men were entering from the main doorways as well as the smaller entrances to the side of the room. The room was awash with fighting men. There were bodies all around. Cries of anger and pain filled the air. Surely we can just wait here. Margaery's voice was low. We can use the table for cover. Lord Forrester shook his head. "'Tis too risky, your grace." Catelyn agreed. Though there were plenty of loyal men in the room, all it would take would be a stray knife or crossbow bolt and Robb's and Margaery's life would be forfeit. That was more than Catelyn could bear. Where would we go? She asked, turning her attention to Lord Forrester. She had to shout to make herself heard over the tumult. Lord Gregor answered while looking towards the fight. "Not far, your grace, just out of the way of the fighting. There is a place." Myra spoke, a hand clasped to her arm that appeared to be bleeding. Her father regarded her. "Myra, lead the way." He looked down at the king. "Can you stand, your grace?" Catelyn shook her son. Robb did not respond. Fighting a lump in her throat, she looked up. "He can't move on his own." "Mother," Robb surged to life. He struggled to speak. "Get Margaery out." "No, Robb." Margaery's voice was hard. "We leave together or not at all." Gregor Forrester nodded grimly. "Very well, your grace. We can carry him from the room and get him someplace safe whilst our men clear out these treasonous scum." He shifted his broadsword into one hand and made to stoop to assist Robb. Suspicion gripped Catelyn. She pushed the lord away. "How can we trust him?" The man looked at her in confusion. "My lady." Myra's voice was surprised and fearful. Catelyn thought fast. Perhaps it would be best if we stayed here." Gregor Forrester looked at her in surprise, but then realization dawned and he nodded grimly. "As you wish, my lady, perhaps we." Two soldiers ran at them from behind. Lord Forrester spun and parried their thrusts, one coming within inches of Margaery's face. The Northman pushed the men back, opening one throat with a riposte and hacking the other man's hand from his arm with a downward slash. As the enemy fell away, Gregor looked back at the women to check their safety. Margaery leaned in to speak to Catelyn. She spoke urgently. "I trust Lord Forrester. He's Myra's father and I have no truer friend than her." Catelyn looked at her good daughter. The queen looked weary and frightened, but her eyes seemed clear enough. "Besides, if he wanted to kill us, we'd be dead already. And Ned Stark had always spoken highly of the Lord of Ironrath." Decided, she spoke to the man above her. "Forgive me, my lord. I think you had the right of it. We should find safety." The lord nodded and reached down once more. Catelyn waved him off. "You need your hands free to protect the king, my lord. Margaery and I can help Robb." The Northman looked questioningly between Margaery and Catelyn. The queen rose to her feet and nodded determinedly. Seeing their resolve, Gregor Forrester stepped back and raised his sword to watch for more foes. Together the king's wife and mother gathered Robb to his feet, draping his arms over their shoulders. The king was barely conscious, his head sagged, he was mumbling faintly. Seeing they were ready, Lord Gregor addressed the small group. "Myra, lead on. Your grace, my lady, don't stop for anything." Lord Forrester examined the room. He picked up a small shield buckler and handed it to his daughter. "Myra, keep this over the king, queen, and yourself." He scanned the room one last time. "Ready, now." The women lurched forward, part carrying, part dragging Robb the few short meters to the side of the room. Her son was heavy, but Catelyn refused to release him. "If he falls, he is lost." Twice men ran at them and twice Gregor Forrester cut into them, dispatching the men quickly and with ease. As they reached the stone wall, Catelyn glanced at Margaery. The girl was sweating and breathing heavily with the exertion of carrying her husband, but a quick look at her face told Catelyn that the girl would not yield. Gregor Forrester formed the rearguard. Many enemies threw themselves at the group, hoping to take advantage of the injured king, but each attempt was thwarted by the Northern Lord stepping in and intercepting their attacks. Men fell left and right as Gregor Forrester cut them down. His broadsword moving fast as he parried and thrust, blunting and returning the enemy's strikes. "Through here!" Myra cried, pushing open one of the small side doors that lead out of the hall. "Quickly, your grace!" Gathering her strength, Caitlin lifted her son and carried him through the doorway, allowing Margaery to go first as she held up the king's other arm. Together they passed through the doorway and away from the sounds and screams of fighting. Caitlin looked around quickly. They had arrived in a room with a small number of tables. Food was strewn over them in various stages of preparation. Large casks of ale were set against one wall. Of course, the kitchen. A place that in the middle of a feast should have been heaving with activity, but, given the events occurring in the hall, was vacant, the servants having run away, seeking safe refuge from the battle taking place all over the castle. Seeking refuge. The same could be said for us, my queen, Myra said, leaning in to assist her mistress. At the back, there's a storeroom. We'll be safe there. Will we truly be safe anywhere? A noise caused Caitlin to turn, her movements encumbered by the weight she was keeping up. A soldier garbed in the colors of House Bolton had entered behind them and was stalking them with a dagger in each hand. Margaery and Caitlin pulled Robb away, deeper into the kitchen and away from the new enemy. Myra pushed in front of them, setting the buckler against her chest. For a moment the man advanced, menace all over his face. Where was Lord Forrester? Are we betrayed? Come now, boy. It's not polite to threaten ladies. The man whirled to face Lord Forrester. The Northman had his sword set in front of him, grim determination writ across his face. The Bolton man leapt in and slashed at the older man. Gregor Forrester stepped forward, letting his gauntlet take the slash. The knife screeched as it ran across the jagged metal. The man lunged with his other knife, but Gregor Forrester twisted aside and thrust the pommel of his sword into the man's exposed neck. With a savage wrench, Gregor opened his foe's throat with the side of his sword. Blood spilled down the front of the Northern Lord and onto the floor. Pushing the dead man away, Lord Forrester looked to his daughter. Myra. The girl indicated a door to the back of the room. At the back, there's a storeroom. We can place the king there. Heaving, the women carried Robb across the kitchen. Their feet struck abandoned food, kicking it out the way as they dragged the king towards the back of the kitchen. Myra got there first and opened the door. Grabbing a torch from a bracket, she ushered the women inside. It was a small space just a few meters across. Caitlin saw that there were sacks of food on the floor, apples, pears and other fruits spilling out them. Here, she muttered to Margaery as she gently lowered her son to the floor. The queen positioned herself at Robb's head, taking it in her hands and kissing his brow. Is he? Caitlin ignored Lord Gregor's question. She looked anxiously at her son. Robb had lost consciousness and did not respond, not matter how much his wife shook him. But he is still breathing, that's a blessing. Myra, we need something to help stop the bleeding. Yes, my lady. The queen's handmaiden went rifling through the storeroom to find something to help tend the king. Well, look what we have here, boys. Looking up, Caitlin saw that a group of Freys had entered the kitchen. Her heart sank. So much for refuge. The men spread out and advanced on the storeroom entrance. The man in the center, a fierce-looking killer with heavy scars across his face, smiled, revealing a great number of missing teeth. Is that the king and queen you've got there, old man? Gregor Forrester stepped into the doorway between the storeroom and the kitchen. What's it to you? Another of the group, one with his cheek split open by a wide gash, smiled evilly. Oh, nothing, nothing. Just we've been told to make them comfortable like. They couldn't see from where they were. But it seemed that Lord Gregor was smiling. I think we've had as much free hospitality as we can stomach. The leader spat at the Northman, the smile dying on his face. Fuck off, old man. No need for you to get involved. Oh, I beg to differ. Gregor replied, pointing his sword at the group of women. The ladies are under my protection. Where I come from we take our oath seriously. You shall not have them while I live. The man with the bleeding gash frowned. That won't be long against 5 of us. Perhaps not, laddie. But I don't need to last too long. Just long enough for my friends in the other hall to deal with your colleagues. 2 of the men looked uncertainly at each other. But the leader caught the shared expression. Come on, you pig fuckers, Lord Walder will give us a rich reward if we're the ones who kill Robb fucking Stark and his whore. Gregor Forrester swung his sword to point at the leader's chest. For that, you're the first one to die. His opponent sneered. Big words, old man. Do you have what it takes to back them up? We shall see. Gregor squared his shoulders, he leaned backwards to address his daughter. Lock the door, Myra. Don't open it until you hear someone you know. Father, the girl sobbed. Her sire twisted his head towards her. Myra, close the door and barricade yourself in. But. Now, Myra. Her father said, looking into her eyes. His face was stern, but there was an abiding affection there. Remember, I love you. You and the rest of the family, but no tears now. He turned his eyes to spy his foe. Iron from ice, daughter. Myra's shaking suddenly ceased, her head snapped up. Iron from ice, father. That's my girl. Gregor Forrester stepped out of the doorway and into the more open space of the kitchen. Behind him, Myra slammed the storeroom door shut and set about covering it. The girl's actions were sure and swift, her mind focused on the task at hand as she worked to set boxes and barrels against the door. Caitlin moved to help her, letting Robb's head sag into Margary's lap. As she and Myra moved a half-filled cask of ale in front of the door, she could hear Lord Forrester in the room beyond. Right, lads, one at a time or all at once, it makes no odds to me. The sound of a sword being hefted from the floor was heard. None of you shall pass. Notes. Thanks for the positive comments about the last chapter. I appreciate that. On the face of it, things might be confusing. Hopefully everything will make sense in the next few chapters. Chapter 37, The Lord of the Crossing. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Everywhere was chaos, the hall was awash with fighting men, shouts of anger, pain and fear filled the air. He looked up at the balcony. There was no one there. Where the hell were the mercenaries? What the hell had gone wrong? He had seen the lumbering brute who answered to Caitlin Stark run past his dais. He could hardly miss her, the blonde ox had sprinted straight at him. For a moment he had feared she had meant to come for him, but instead she had ignored him and leapt for a tapestry that had been hung next to the dais. Hor climbed it like a squirrel in a tree. She had disappeared over the balcony railing and had not been seen since. Hopefully the bitch was cut down by the mercenaries. That's what they were being paid for after all. Still, he couldn't see her, but this offered him no solace as his men were also still absent. Curses. He could have used the crossbows to keep the enemy back. His bodyguards had run off. Everywhere he looked, his family was engaged in fighting. For a horrible moment he had sat in his high-backed chair watching in paralyzing fear as the fighting got closer and closer to him. When combat had finally breached the small perimeter around the dais, he had decided that enough was enough. It was time to leave. It was then he had realized that he was all alone, that there was no one to assist him as he struggled from his chair and made for a side exit to the chamber. Pa. I'll make it. I'll be damned if I'm going to die here. The old man hit the wall, the breath forced from his lungs, the dry flesh of his palm were opened by the uneven stone. Walder Free made his way along the wall, quickly casting an eye back, scanning the hall. No one was following him, nor even paying him any mind. He was just an old man after all, not worth the attention of these valiant knights. Fools, all of them. Cursing, the old man lumbered through the entrance and picked his way unsteadily down the corridor, as fast as his old legs would carry him. He stumbled over his own feet, almost tripping himself. He struggled out of the heavily embroidered robe that he had been dressed in for the wedding. It worked well when he was sitting in the high table, but now it did nothing but hinder his movements, as slow and crippled as they were. He entered another small corridor, breathing heavily. His face was covered in sweat. He leaned against the hard stone surface, taking in deep breaths in huge gulps. He could not say if the ragged breathing was a result of his exertion or that of fear. Nor did he care to think about it. How had it all gone wrong? Lord Walder didn't have time to consider that either, but now, alone in a corridor in his own castle, the sounds of his men fighting and dying receding in the halls getting more distant with every step he took, found his mind wandering. It had all seemed so simple. Kill Robb Stark, his wife, his mother and his uncle. Decapitate the entire leadership of the Alliance in one fell stroke. The old man's anger surged. I cannot be blamed for this. I was insulted by the Starks. I've been swallowing the contempt of these so-called highborn lords all my life. I thought the jesting had peaked when the bastard Hoster Tully named me the late Lord Free for failing to arrive in time.